Good morning, everybody, and I would like to extend a very big welcome to you for the first MBA Open Day event in 2021 from UCD Graduate School of Business. My name is Sophie Carey and I'm Senior Manager here responsible for MBA Programmes in the school, and I'll be your MC for this morning. So to start our session today, to deliver our welcome address, I will now hand you over to Professor Geraldine Doyle, Associate Dean of UCD College of Business and Director of the Smurfit School. Over to you, Geraldine.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Good morning, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to our UCD Michael Smurfit Graduate Business School MBA Open Event. My name is Professor Geraldine Doyle and I am Associate Dean of the College of Business and Director of the UCD Smurfit School. Saturday mornings are very precious, so we are very pleased to see so many of you with us for this virtual format, and thank you for joining us. Under normal circumstances, we would be welcoming you face-to-face on our beautiful campus here in Blackrock, County Dublin, but for now we are happy to speak with you in the safety of your own homes. The purpose of this event is threefold. One, to enable you to get a sense of and a flavour for what it is like to undertake an MBA at Ireland's top business school. Second, to meet some of our faculty and our MBA team. And thirdly, for us to answer as many questions as possible for you. Our flagship MBA programme is ranked by the Financial Times and The Economist and is one of the oldest MBA programmes in Europe. We have a track record of delivering an outstanding programme. As recently as this week, the UCD Smurfit School gained 23 places in The Economist 2021 full-time MBA ranking, and we are now ranked 67th in the world. What is most pleasing is that we ranked in the world's top 35 for student quality. For you, this means that the UCD Smurfit School MBA presents an opportunity to learn from both world-leading faculty and from the expertise of fellow MBA participants from a globally diverse community. And this is because of the high caliber of professionals we attract. Our faculty, many of whom are international experts in their fields, are invested in and committed to the academic integrity and continuous innovation on our MBA programme. And shortly you're going to meet two of our faculty, Professor Muckley, and Cal is Professor of Finance and is also Academic Director of our MBA programme. And then chairing our alumni panel discussion this morning is Professor Niamh Brennan. And Niamh is the Michael McCormick Professor of Management. We have a long-term strategy of ongoing curriculum enhancement, and we are very excited for you to hear this morning Cal's taste lecture on data analytics. This is a new MBA module and is an illustrative example of the sustained investment in faculty and research within the school. Our unique and bespoke leadership development programme, and you'll hear later about this morning, is specifically designed to enhance your leadership skills, your international competency, intercultural competency, and indeed the soft skills that will accelerate your leadership career. Our careers team are deeply embedded with all leading Irish and international employers, and we regularly facilitate the world's top companies in engaging with our students. When you join us, you automatically gain exposure to our more than 4,000 MBA alumni who are living all over the world, and many of whom are senior leaders in their industries, creating meaningful impact in the world of business. In addition, we have an administrative programme team specifically dedicated to the care of our MBA students. Sophie Carey leads this team, and Sophie is our MC for today. So in summary, deciding to study for an MBA is a huge decision, not only for you, but also for your family, your friends, and indeed your employer. We are here to support you every step of the way, and we have a passion and commitment to our current and future students. Whether you are looking to change function, change sector, or indeed what we call make the triple MBA jump, which is of changing country, we can help you, and we have many alumni who have made this journey before you. So enjoy today, and thank you for joining us to share our UCD Smurfit School MBA experience with you. And now it's my great pleasure to hand back to Sophie. Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, Geraldine. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now for you. So bear with me one moment, and hopefully you can see that now. Okay, so as Geraldine mentioned, we have a busy and exciting agenda for you today, and I hope that as a participant, you will gain a greater understanding of our MBA programs and be motivated to consider to apply for an MBA here with us in UCD Smurfit School. Before I talk you briefly through today's agenda here on the slide, I just want to encourage you to use the Q&A function on Zoom. So send us your questions throughout the morning, and our team will be on hand to answer your questions. And indeed, we'll have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the morning at 11:45 a.m. Where I'll be joined by some of my colleagues. However, we will be answering your questions as we go via Zoom. Alternatively, you can also email a question to the following email address, mba@ucd.ie, and we will get back to you next week. And finally, just to let you know, we are recording this webinar today, and so we will email the full webinar out to you next week if you've registered for the session this morning. Okay, so now to our agenda, just briefly to kind of summarize again. I'm going to shortly give you an overview of our MBA programs and reasons why you should consider our Smurfit MBA. And then you'll have an opportunity to hear from my colleague, Jessica Dowling. Jessica is our MBA Admissions Manager, and she'll give you information on how you can apply to the MBA and what are the criteria and what scholarship opportunities are available to you. After that, at 10:15, Geraldine mentioned our academic director, Professor Muckley, will deliver a taste lecture to give you a sense of what it's like to sit through an MBA lecture on his specialist topic in data analytics. And then following this session, Professor Niamh Brennan will host our MBA Thought Leadership panel with a selection of our alumni who are going to join us this morning, and they will just engage on a discussion, as mentioned, around navigating boardroom dynamics. So I'll let Niamh introduce herself, and our alumni will introduce themselves later on this morning. So I won't go through the details of that just yet. And as I mentioned, finally, Professor Muckley and Jessica will join me for a Q&A session at the end of the morning at around 11:45 when we finish up. So just a reminder, please do use that Q&A function, and we'll be keeping an eye on questions as they come up throughout the morning, and hopefully we can answer everything and put your mind at ease for any questions you might have. Okay, so I'm just going to move along to move my slides along, so bear with me. One second now, it's not moving for me. Paul, are you able to move the slides along for me, please? Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so just very briefly, why UCD? So I just wanted to cover this for one moment, for any of you there who aren't familiar with UCD. So University College Dublin is Ireland's global university, and our business school here is obviously part of University College Dublin. The university is over 160 years old, and it's a modern campus with world-class facilities, including an Olympic pool, sports centre, cinema. And our own campus here in UCD, Michael Smurfit Graduate Business School, is only 4 kilometres from our main campus in UCD. There is ongoing investment in the campus. We have state-of-the-art facilities and much, much more. So just if you're not aware and you're not familiar with our campus, those facilities and sports facilities are also available to all of our students. Okay, so UCD Smurfit, why come to UCD Smurfit? So as I mentioned, we have a dedicated campus here in Blackrock. We have approximately 1,500 students with 26 specialised master's programmes and an executive education program, in addition to our flagship MBA programs. So we're very much a dedicated campus. We have wonderful facilities. And of course, we would love to invite you here, hopefully one day in the near future, to come and see our campus in person when that becomes possible. This campus opened in 1991, and I suppose previously it was a teacher training college owned by an order of nuns, just in terms of a little bit of history. So UCD itself has been offering business degrees since 1911. And in 1964, we actually became the first school in Europe to offer the MBA. So we've been delivering the MBA program for a long number of years. We have a lot of experience. And as Geraldine referred to in her welcome address, we therefore have a large number of alumni from our MBA program all over the world. So we have, in fact, the largest MBA alumni base in Ireland. We're also the only business school in Ireland with a triple crown of accreditation. And I'm referring to AMBA, the Association of MBAs, EQUIS and AACSB. So this triple crown represents accrediting bodies from the UK, the US and Europe. And it's a very prestigious, I suppose, recognition of what we do and how we do it well here in UCD Smurfit. We have several global alliances and memberships that we're very proud of. I'm going to speak a little bit later about GNAM, which is the Global Network for Advanced Management Schools. And we are the only Irish member of this prestigious network of 32 international global business schools. So we do make the most of our global alliances, and there are opportunities from this for our MBA students, which I'll explain to you later on. And then again, as Geraldine also mentioned, we're consistently ranked in the top 100 of prestigious rankings bodies, such as the Financial Times and The Economist. And most recently, only about a week or so ago, we were ranked first in Ireland for our full-time MBA program by The Economist and 67th globally. And also for our executive MBA program, we've been ranked 32nd in Europe by the Financial Times and 62nd globally. So our rankings are very important to us and something that gives us recognition internationally. And I suppose for you, considering an MBA, it's a quality stamp, it's quality assurance that you're coming to a top program that's perceived very highly internationally. Okay. And to my next slide. Okay, so just briefly what I want to do is outline the three programs that we have here in terms of three ways you can undertake the MBA. And my colleague Jessica, after my session, will go into a little bit more detail about this as well. But just briefly, what I want to tell you about is we have three options for study. Our first option is our full-time MBA. So our full-time MBA this year will commence on the 24th of August. It's a 12-month program. And it's a full-time program, as I mentioned. So typically students are giving up a job and they're coming and they're undertaking this program, which is the equivalent of a full-time job and more. It's a very immersive experience, and the class would be very much a mix of domestic and international students. And so that's one option that you may be considering. But for those of you that aren't considering doing the program full-time, that may wish to continue working whilst doing the MBA, we do have two additional options. So our first option there for the part-time program is the Executive MBA, and that is taught over 2 years, so 24 months. As I mentioned, it's a part-time program for people who are working already. This year it commences on the 24th of August, and it's taught on a Monday and a Thursday evening. So you would do, on a Monday, for example, 2 classes of 2 hours, starting at 5:45, finish and your next class starting at 7:45 until 9:45. So you have a 4-hour segment, you're covering 2 topics, and you would do that twice a week, excuse me, on a Monday and a Thursday evening. You cover most of your core modules in year 1, and then you do get access to some more optional modules in year 2. Okay, so that may be for some people that they want to come in consistently onto campus and kind of meet their groups and be participating on an ongoing basis. This year then, our next third option and our final option is the Executive MBA modular version. So this is a new offering that we're launching this year. On the 25th of August is the start date. So again, this is a 2-year part-time program, but the difference is that this is essentially taught on Fridays and Saturdays. So you will come in for a full day, Friday and Saturday, once a month. Now there are some additional days for leadership development throughout the year, and the full details are on our website on the curriculum page. So please do when you have a chance, check out smurfitschool.ie. And if you go to MBA Programmes, you'll see our 3 options outlined. And for this particular program, if you click into Modular MBA, there's a curriculum tab, and you can see all of the details and all of the dates for our various programs. So please do check that out when you get an opportunity. So each module is 24 hours. So Friday and Saturday would be about 16 hours face-to-face. You would also have 4 hours on online, and then you would have 4 hours at what we call term foundation. So the 4 hours online and during term foundation would be in advance of the Friday, Saturday. So you're essentially building up your knowledge before you come and do an intensive weekend of work. And I suppose this assessment for this type of program would be primarily continuous assessment as well. So that's a summary. And as I said, we'll be answering questions throughout the morning. And I just want to give you a little bit more detail of our program as we go on. Okay, so just to give you a flavor of some of the modules that are covered in the MBA, obviously you know that an MBA is a general business degree. So we cover core subjects around finance, HR, strategy, marketing. And the subjects here, for example, give you a flavor of what's covered in our own MBA program, from competitive strategy, financial reporting, leadership and organizational behavior, corporate finance, performance marketing, strategies for HR, entrepreneurship, negotiation, business and society, executive decision making are some of them. And this year we have 2 additions to our core curriculum, or sorry, to our curriculum, I should say. Data analytics and also digital transformation. And Professor Muckley will be speaking to you later and giving you a flavor of data analytics and a taste lecture. So that'll bring that subject a little bit alive for you later on. And just one thing to mention is that it's not necessary to have a business degree doing an MBA. Sometimes people ask us this, but most of our students don't have a business background. They come from all different backgrounds, whether that's engineering, pharma, medicine, teaching. It's very, very varied. And the idea of an MBA is that you're mixing with students from all different backgrounds. So it isn't essential to have a business or any prior business knowledge. So that would be, a question we would typically get asked. So I think it's important just to mention that. Okay, so why do the Smurfit MBA? Well, there's many reasons. I suppose the first reason here is around career impact. So we know that many of our students who do an MBA, they change career or they get promoted. And we have statistics to prove that. And we have many statistics on our website, which you can look at in terms of those who make career change, who get promoted within a year of leaving, for example, the program. So an MBA is a stepping stone to help people either progress in their career, accelerate their career, or pivot to another area. For example, our full-time MBA program, typically about 50% of our students will go into either technology or consulting careers, and the rest of our students will I suppose, go into a range of other sectors as well. So it's very, very varied. Many of our executive MBA students will also change career either during the program or after the program, and also they will potentially get promoted as well. So we have lots of evidence of that. And an MBA helps people build their confidence, build their knowledge base, and also build their connections. The next point really here is around industry connections. So we have a lot of connections with industry, and through our careers team, through our faculty, we very much work with our industry connections and build upon those for the benefit of our students. Our alumni network, I mentioned, is a really important reason why people do our MBA, to get access to this alumni network of over 4,000 graduates and alumni of the MBA program. So, we actually, that's a key thing for us. And as you know, we have an alumni panel this morning, and we keep very, very close to our alumni. And MBA alumni really help one another out. And that's just so, so important, whether it's from a career point of view or really just making connections in an industry. I mentioned our global focus as well and our global alliances such as GNAM, which I'll speak about later, which is really, really important for us. And our quality of lecturers is something we're extremely proud of. We have the largest and most prestigious faculty base in the country. And I suppose the other thing to mention there as well, in terms of our location in Dublin, is that Dublin is a hub, you know, for many multinational companies, many US companies headquartered here, many pharma companies. So we're very much a hub for tech and pharma companies and many other companies. And there are so many opportunities in Dublin. And despite the pandemic, you know, for example, in our full-time MBA program, we have a number of students who've already found opportunities and have been offered jobs despite the fact that they won't finish until August. So there are opportunities here in Dublin, and there are good opportunities for our graduates. And then finally, I just wanted to mention the experiential learning. That's a really key piece of the MBA program. You know, learning by doing, essentially, through various projects that we provide, which I'll speak about briefly in a moment. Okay, Geraldine alluded to our MBA Leadership Development Program, and that is something I wanted to mention here. This is an integrated and complementary program in addition to our core curriculum. And essentially we focus on leadership and development across 3 key areas: the organization, the team, and the individual. And what the program does is essentially help you to build leadership skills beyond the MBA. And what I've listed on the left-hand side there are some of the things we do as part of our leadership development program. We offer executive coaching. We run a series of monthly masterclasses. We have MBA clubs, which are student-led. We run case competitions and hackathons. And all of this is to help you develop your confidence and build your leadership skills beyond the MBA. The capstone project is something I want to mention too. It's a final project that you will do as part of your program, no matter which option you choose. And you can see some examples there of companies that our students work with. Essentially, student groups partner with companies to execute a valuable business project for the client. So the capstone is an opportunity to apply research and analytical skills and problem-solving skills in a real-world environment. So essentially, you're developing your consulting skills. And you can see examples of some of the clients our students have worked with, and you can see some of the types of projects here. So for example, a new market entry strategy and location decision matrix for a hospitality company. Okay, we also have a number of travel modules as part of our MBA program. So 2 that I'm referencing here would be our MBA International Study Tour, and previous destinations have included Argentina, China, for example. Where students go to an international, on an international trip and to visit companies across sectors and industries and to understand the economics of the country and various institutions. It's optional for executive EMBAs or executive MBAs, and it's something that's on the core curriculum for our full-time students. And there is an additional cost for executive MBAs to this, a small cost depending on where we travel. And then the MBA International Consulting Project, again, is part of the core curriculum for our full-time students and optional for executive MBA students. Previous destinations have included Iceland and Lisbon. And similar to the capstone project, this happens before the capstone. It's an opportunity for you to develop your consulting skills and also to work with international clients. So for example, with a startup in Lisbon that has a particular consulting problem. Okay, and then just before, I'm almost at the end of my section. So just to mention our global alliances, one of which I referred to earlier is the Global Network of Advanced Management Schools. As I said, it's a network of 32 leading business schools, including Yale, Berkeley, Fudan. We were actually one of the founding partners, along with Yale, of this alliance. And we're the only Irish member. And essentially, this provides additional learning opportunities for our MBA students in 2 ways. We have a Global Network Week, which is an immersive networking experience where you can travel to another school with students from and work with other MBA students on a particular module. So for example, you could go to Yale and study organizational behavior, I think is the topic they cover there. And our SNOCs are small network online courses, And these are online courses that are made available across the network to all of our MBA students, where you can choose an additional specialist topic. So for example, you could study high-tech entrepreneurship in IE Business School in Spain. Okay, and then just finally, I wanted to re-emphasize, I suppose, the importance of our UCD alumni network and our community. And I have some stats here that I've just put on screen. And I suppose you'll hear a bit more from our alumni later on, but it's something that we have a dedicated alumni team here in the business school, and we work very, very closely for careers and also our alumni to kind of work with our students and provide as much opportunities as possible. So I've come to the end of my section, and what I want to do now is introduce my colleague, Jessica Dowling. And as I mentioned before, Jessica is our MBA Admissions Manager. And for most of you, she'll be your first point of contact when you're applying to our program. And she's going to speak to you now about our admissions process and scholarship opportunities. So thank you for listening. And Jessica, it's over to you now.
Okay, thank you very much, Sophie, for your introduction. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for making the time to come join us this morning. I am going to go through our, as Sophie said, how you actually apply to the program and also our scholarships available. So if you just give me one moment, I'm going to share my slides. Okay, great. So just going on to the first slide. So firstly, just to cover how you actually apply to all three programs. So the application process for all three programs is very similar. You apply firstly online through our website. It's totally done online. The main entry criteria would be a minimum of 3 years professional work experience. So this is also at time of application. So we do look for people who have a decent amount of work experience because really an MBA is it's experience masters. It's designed for you to bring your own knowledge to the class and you work very collaboratively. So we do look for work experience. We also look for a university degree. Now, if you don't have a university degree, please just get in touch with us because there are other pathways that you can go. But that would be one of the main criteria as well. Then we also look for either a GMAT or an executive assessment score. So if you're not familiar with these exams, these are essentially standardized tests which look at your verbal skills, your mathematical skills, and your integrated reasoning. The GMAT is the traditional long form of the exam, and the executive assessment is a shorter, more streamlined version of it, but they essentially cover the same abilities, and we do require them. We don't offer waivers. We do look for them for all applicants for all of our three programs. You can see there the minimum scores that we do look for. What you can do is apply to the program first and then be made what will be called a conditional offer, and then you can sit either a GMAT or an executive assessment after you have your conditional offer. So that's an option that you can look at. We also look for 2 letters of recommendation. So these should be from current or former employers. We have a template available on our website that you can use. And then within the actual application form itself, we ask you to complete 3 short essay questions. They're maximum 300 words, so they really are more like paragraphs. These look at why you want to apply for an MBA with us, what you feel you would bring to the program yourself, and then post-MBA, what you would like to do post-MBA. There's also a short video segment for our full-time MBA applicants that just asks you a few competency-based questions, and it's very quick to apply. So once you have all of that submitted to us, eligible candidates deemed suitable will be invited for an interview. Obviously, at the moment, all our interviews are being done via Zoom or Skype. So a question I do get quite a bit in from admissions perspective is, what do you look for in applicants applying to our MBA? So there would be core competencies that we would look for. We would look for people who have good experience with teamwork, people who enjoy working collaboratively. We do look for people with, potentially an entrepreneur background, people who have got good communication skills. But as Sophie said earlier, we don't particularly look for a certain background in terms of education. You don't need to have done a business background. We have people from all different types of background, from medicine, engineering, people who have started their own business, education, the arts, everything like that. We really just look for, your personal skills. And what we also look for is to ensure that you're doing it for the right reasons and you're the right fit for the program. So as I mentioned, it is very collaborative. So we do look for people who are comfortable working in that environment. And we are also looking for people who are, really willing to give their all to the program. It is very much a program that you get as much as you give to it. So as much as you, dedicate your time to the program, you will really get a huge amount out of it. And then finally, The review process itself, all applications are looked at by an MBA Admissions Committee, so it is a holistic review process. It wouldn't be a case that if you didn't have an undergraduate, or if you weren't, maybe didn't have a high grade in your undergrad, that doesn't preclude you. We do look at all the different elements together. So your overall profile, your background, your CV, the interview itself, and then also your GMAT or EA score. So this slide, I think, will probably be quite useful to people. I've seen there's a few questions coming in, what's the difference between the programs? So firstly, just to say, all three are an MBA and they're a master's level, so a level 9 qualification. So no matter what version or what format of the MBA that you do with us, you do leave with a Smurfit MBA. So you leave with that qualification, that accreditation, and that networking and visibility of that MBA. The biggest difference really is delivery, and also I would say what you are looking for and who you are yourself at this point in your career. So starting with the full-time MBA, this is, as Sophie said, it's essentially a full-time job plus more. So it's very immersive, it's very, it's very intensive. It's a 1-year full-time program. You do study August through all the way to the next August. So you do need to ensure that you can give this your full concentration. It's very immersive. It's a very diverse cohort, so there would be a lot of international students in the class with you. This is great for networking, and this is great to get unique perspectives outside of Ireland. So we're very proud of that. There's also, as Sophie mentioned as well earlier, the international trips. So it is very immersive. You get to know your classmates really, really well. And we would really consider this something that will either change or redefine your career. So a number of people decide to do the full-time MBA because they want to completely pivot maybe in a new direction, or they really just want to refine what they're doing. So it really gives you the chance to take a year out for yourself, really concentrate on your learning, your leadership and development, where you want to go in the future, and really dedicate yourself to that. We would recommend this generally for people who are suited to intensive learning, people who really want to come back into a college and have that experience. And you also get regular interaction with the faculty and peers. So that would be our full-time program. Then the executive part-time MBA. So this is the option that's taught on a Monday and a Thursday evening. So this is really designed for people who want to balance their study and work together. And it's also designed for people who want to accelerate their career. So for example, if you have come from a more technical background, such as engineering, and you are now going into management level, but you've never studied business and you want to develop your skills there, this would be an ideal program for you. And it combines independent study with regular interaction. So during term time, you are in twice a week, engaging with the faculty and the staff and your peers. So it's definitely recommended for people, people in the Dublin area, because currently these programs are online due to COVID, but they will, as soon as it is safe, be back in person, face to face. So people who are able to come into the campus and who want to accelerate their career and expand their network. And as mentioned, that's a 2-year part-time program, and it's 2 nights a week during term time. And then the new modular MBA offering. So this really offers flexibility. So this is designed for people who either through family commitments, work commitments, or geographical reasons can't be on campus weekly. So you would be on campus once a month, and then the rest of the learning is a blend of online learning and working with your peers using Zoom or Teams and so on. You complete 1 module at a time, so you move on like that. It is set, as Sophie said, it's available on our website. It is a mix of in-person and online learning, more so than the other 2 would be. And I personally think it's ideal for independent learners. So if you feel you don't want to be on campus regularly, if you do like doing your own path and you have a busy schedule, this would be ideal for you. So I would definitely say, again, people nationwide, it's a very flexible option, but you do have that dedicated support always in the background. And again, you do have the networking opportunities and everything available to you. So that also is 2 years part-time, and that is at the weekends once a month. And then there would be some other evening sort of teaching as well. So then moving on to the scholarships. So we do offer a range of scholarships for our MBA programs. So they are both merit and needs-based. Generally speaking, most of the scholarships you don't need to apply separately. So when you apply online, as I was speaking about before, there is a section on scholarships, and you just pop in, there's a drop-down menu that you can see all the scholarships. So you pick the one you feel is most applicable to yourself, and then you apply for it there. There's a short supporting statement. 1 or 2 scholarships, such as the UCD Sports Scholarship and also the Aspire Scholarship, they do require a separate application. But my best advice would be to go to our website, because there are a lot of scholarships and they all kind of have, some of them have quite different terms and conditions. So I would just read through them yourself in your own time. But the majority of them for the MBA, it's part of your actual MBA application. So they range from partial support to full tuition free cover. And this year we're partnering with a number of media outlets. So you may have already seen this online or on social media. So we are partnering with her.ie, The Journal, and Image Magazine. So these are 100% scholarships. You can find out more information on our website. They're a fantastic opportunity. I absolutely recommend everyone apply for them because, you know, you have to be in it to win it, basically. So I do think they are merit-based, and I do think everyone should apply for them. We also, in particular, offer a number of scholarships dedicated for women. So we have the Women on the MBA Scholarship, which is worth 50% of your tuition fee. And we also partner with the 30% Club, and this is also a scholarship which is worth 50%. So, and they're available for the executive MBA offerings. So now just going on to some useful resources and tips. Obviously from my perspective, from the admission side, there is a lot of information. So I do recommend you check out our website. It is very comprehensive, and here would be some particular things I recommend. I firstly do recommend the Smurfit School blog. This is a blog that's kept by current students, and they talk firsthand about their own experiences on the program. It's just a really good way to see how the program, you know, runs and their own experiences for it. So that's a really good resource. The Smurfit School news page, we're always in the news. We always have good news stories. Mentioned earlier in the presentation about the rankings. We would also have, you know, Initiative Swim, which is women in leadership, lots of different news stories like that. So that's a great place to prescribe to that. All of our webinars are, like this one today, are actually recorded. So if you go onto our webinar section of our website, there's a huge resource of pre-recorded webinars that you can use to find out more information. They also include different taster lectures from different academic staff. So that's a great resource as well. We always have a number of events coming up. So again, our events page, they're all listed there. They're a very good resource. And we also have a YouTube channel as well. And then going on, as Sophie also mentioned, we have lots of clubs and societies. So we have GEMBA, which is Gender Equality on the MBA, Consulting Club, FinTech, and many more. And if you do come and join our MBA program, if you would like to set up a club or society, you can absolutely do that. You get support from the MBA program office, including some funding. And it's a great way to network and a great way to combine your interests with your MBA study. So I definitely recommend that as well. Another support that we offer is that we offer GMAT and EA prep sessions, concentrating on the quantitative side of it. So these sessions are free to attend. They take place on a Wednesday evening. We have 4 schedules coming up over the next 2 months. You can book these through our events page, which I mentioned earlier. And I definitely recommend these. If you're not too familiar with what a GMAT or an EA is, you should definitely come along to one of these sessions. Jerry, who runs the sessions, he goes through individual maths questions. So it is just the quantitative section, but it just gives you a really good idea of, you know, what you would be studying or what you'd be tested on. And he's a great resource as well. And he's a great guy. So I definitely recommend going along to them. They are free to attend. If you do have any final questions, or if you want to speak to me directly, you can either email me at mba@ucd.ie, or what we also have every Friday afternoon between 2 and 3 p.m, we have a virtual drop-in session. So it's just a Zoom link. It's on the events page, and you can just click into that. There will be a member of the admission staff there, happy to help, just answer your question in real time, which is just a nice quick way, if you just have a very quick question, that you can just use that resource if needed. So what I'm going to do now is, I mentioned before the GMAT and the EA. The EA we do accept for all 3 of the programs, and it is a really good test. I do tend to recommend it to people because it is 90 minutes over the 3 hours for the full GMAT. And what I have now is a short video from one of our current EMBA students. His name is Cahill. He sat the EA himself, and he was able to put together some basic advice on how he sat the EA and how he prepared. So I'll get Paul to play that now.
Could summarize in sort of 5 minutes or so any tips and tricks I can pass on about how to get past the executive assessment as part of your entry requirements to do an executive MBA. So I did this during the summer just past. I decided to do the executive MBA around May, and kind of quickly decided to do the executive assessment as opposed to the GMAT. And how I reached that decision was, I suppose, I spoke to people in faculty in UCD, and I also was lucky enough to speak to some current students of the executive MBA who were already there ahead of me, and I got their advice. And I suppose consistent advice from them was that time commitment wise, that's the big advantage of doing the executive assessment over the GMAT. The scope of the exam isn't quite as big. I think it is more expensive, so that's a factor, and you have to bear that in mind. In my case, work were sponsoring it, so that was not such a factor for me. But all I can say is I decided to do it in May. I took the exam in June. I passed fine, so I was able to fit it in alongside work reasonably easily. A few days a week, doing maybe 2 or 3 hours of prep. That was enough prep for me, and I was able to get a decent passing grade. So it worked from that perspective for me. In terms of actual preparation for the exam then itself, I suppose it's only 5 minutes, so it can't be overly verbose with this, but the big point I'd emphasize on preparation is to just get practice questions and just do practice questions and do more practice questions, and that is the best way to prepare for this exam, because there's a sort of a knack to some of the different sections, and for me anyway, the best way for me to learn was to actually do the practice questions and pick up the knack of how to answer some of them then by getting things wrong and looking at what I got wrong. And that's how I learned. So there are 3 sections to the exam. There's integrated reasoning, there's verbal, and there's quantitative. And those 3 are all part of the GMAT as well. So the GMAT's a broader scope exam, but you can use practice questions from the GMAT too, and part of your preparation. I use the practice questions from the GMAC, and there's some free ones on there. You can also buy some. I didn't bother because I just rounded out my practice then with other free exams, those sections of the free GMAT exams, and that's how I prepared. By doing the preparation questions, you'll find out pretty quickly what you're strong at and what you're weak at. So for me, the quantitative sections, I'm kind of, maths is, I'm reasonably strong at that. So for me, with the quantitative sections, I just found that I was able to answer those reasonably well. And I'm just looking at my notebook here from the exam, and all I'd written down was, don't get cocky and estimate things, work out the answers properly and be sure. And take a guess if you run out of time. And that's important. Do take a guess if you run out of time, because you got to answer all the questions. The quantitative section's at the end. So the way I think the exam works is that it's adaptive in that if you're answering the first section well, integrated reasoning, then the next section gets harder. And if you answer that poorly, then the next section gets easier, and the marks reflect the degree of difficulty. So I'm looking at my grades here, and I must have had an easier set of questions in quantitative reasoning because I did not do great in verbal. But I'll just share with you the few tips that I had written down in my notebook. So integrated reasoning and verbal elements of it are probably the bits that I found hardest. So there's 4 different parts of integrated reasoning. First one's tables. What I'd written down for myself was just read them very carefully, determine the information needed from the questions, and just to answer each statement, and use the sort. You're able to sort the tables, so just make absolutely sure you get that question right. Those ones are a bit quantitative, so those weren't so hard for me. The graphics one, again, read the question carefully, and make a big picture summary of in your head of what the graphic's telling you. Be very careful on units of measure. They throw in some trick questions with that by changing up units of measure sometimes, so be wary of that. And check all the possible answers before calculating your own responses, and to be sure, because you ultimately are doing it's multiple choice, all these questions, but you can kind of rule some out fairly early. Multi-source then, and 2-part. These are kind of verbal, and these ones I just worked out a way that I think I got from one of the websites, just a method for answering these questions. So first is just identify the question is step 1. It's verbal stuff and it's quite wordy, so that's not as easy as it sounds. Then find a support for an answer in the section, what could actually be supportive of any position you take to answer the question. Predict what you think the answer is, and only at that point then look at the multiple choice options and eliminate what is definitely wrong. And then after that, I just had a guess. Now, I didn't do amazing in the verbal section, but that was the approach I took, and that was what I got it from one of the websites, and it worked, because if nothing else, it kept me calm, and I had my process in the exam to run through. For verbal, there's a few sections. Again, there's one around sentence correction. This one, again, just do as many practice questions as you can. You'll find some good material online that'll explain the difference between due to and because of and things like that, and one takes a noun and the other takes a verb. So there's stuff like that is just a matter of, at least for me, I had to just learn that, because I would use due to and because of as an example interchangeably, and apparently you shouldn't. So yeah, again, as many practice questions there as possible. And like I said, the quantitative stuff, again, I just found that not too bad, and it was just a matter of paying attention. So read the questions really carefully, do as many practice questions as you can, and you guys should be fine with the executive assessment. So best of luck with it. I hope it goes well for you. Bye.
Great. Well, thanks so much for Cathal. Cathal did very, very well in the EA. He was just being modest there. So I hope I'm out of time now for my session, but I hope you found it useful. I will be sharing these slides as well, and I'll also be answering some questions in the Q&A box and later on today as well. So if you do have any questions around admissions or scholarships or anything like that, please do reach out to me. And I'm going to hand you back now to Sophie, who's going to continue on. So thank you very much.
Great. Okay, so thank you, Jessica. I know there's a lot of information for people there. So, we certainly can send, myself and Jessica can circulate our slides next week. Somebody asked on the Q&A if that was possible, to give you a little bit more time to digest that information. That's no problem. So just for me, a quick reminder, we have the Q&A box live and we are answering questions as they're coming in. And you can also send any questions to mba@ucd.ie. Okay, so what I want to do next is welcome our next speaker. So our guest lecturer this morning is Professor Muckley, who is the MBA Academic Director here in UCD Smurfit. And today, Professor Muckley will deliver a short lecture to give you a taste of what it's like to experience the MBA classroom. And this format of a taste lecture allows us to showcase the type of teaching and learning typical of an MBA lecture. So without further ado, I'll hand you over, Cal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Good morning, all. I'm delighted to be with you here this morning to give you this mini lecture in data analytics. So this data analytics is in fact related to a brand new option module on the MBA programs, and it resonates with other curriculum extensions that I've been developing as academic director of the program. In particular, digital transformation, a new module that we have underway this year as well. And in the pipeline, a module on the economics of fintech. So I see these as kind of going together, these various option modules in the economics of fintech, in digital transformation, and in data analytics. My own background for a moment, for the last 2 decades or so, I guess my background could be characterized as working in teams on open questions in economics, finance, and data science, really at the interface between the corporation and the financial markets. And in the last 6 or 7 years, my teams and I have really specialized in embedding intellectual property. So that's new licensed technology in the data science space in corporations with a view to addressing real business problems. So with all that in mind, then I'll turn to this morning's mini lecture. So. It should pop up now. So we're going to talk about empowering management. Empowering management with data analytics to do what? To add value to a corporation. So how can, what I'm really getting at here is how can management be part of the latent value in data science, in data analytics, in artificial intelligence, in predictive analytics. These are, for the purposes of this mini lecture, very much interchangeable terms. So how can we add value to a firm via data analytics, particularly from the perspective of people with business domain expertise, with management expertise? Now, we'll do this in this lecture through the universal business problem of losing customers, right? So we want to minimize losing customers. So we call this tackling customer churn. But frankly, I could have framed this lecture very easily in respect to lots of different business problems. I mean, that's one of the beauties of data science. It cuts right across business problems. So from HR in areas like recruitment and promotion, Data science can be, data analytics, predictive analytics can be extremely helpful. My own area is anti-fraud modeling, so anti-money laundering, protecting elderly clients from financial abuse. Again, data science can be extremely useful. In a marketing space, product positioning and recommendation positions are ways to realize the value of data science, tackling perennial, long-standing business questions. So nonetheless, this morning we're going to take the problem of customer churn, so that's losing your customer, and see how data science, and in particular the role of management within data science, can address productively the problem of customer churn. So to be more specific about that, just how can leadership within business contribute to realizing the value of machine learning for in respect to business problems? This will be dealt with in what I hope will be a kind of a hands-on way, despite our tight time limit here, in respect to the problem of customer churn. And we're going to look specifically at a major issue in data science, and that is what are the ethical implications of implementing artificial intelligence within a business setting? The ethical implications. And of course, that's one important way that management can contribute in this setting. So let's begin looking at this term, data analytics. And let's begin with the first word here, data. So data, let's begin with data. The business media has repeatedly highlighted that big data can be viewed as the new gold. So the idea is that data, a critical criterion of data is its quality, just like gold. It needs to be refined or processed, that's for sure, just like gold, before we can really tap into the meaning within it. But unlike gold, data is plentiful. There's no scarcity. And in fact, it's increasingly plentiful. So IBM here gives us a sense of the quantity of recorded data on a daily basis. And to really kind of get into the language of this space, you've got to know your megabytes from your terabytes, from your petabytes, from your exabytes, and so on. But McKinsey Analytics puts it pretty bluntly and says, look, the estimate that we have is that there's about 2.5 quintillion bytes per day recorded. That's by 10 to the power of 18, by the way. And what does that mean? It's kind of a mind-boggling number, even if you can write it down, even if you can write it down successfully. So what does it mean? Well, essentially what we're saying here is that there's vast amounts of data and it's growing rapidly. So if you look at the amount of data stored in the world today, 90% of it didn't exist 2 years ago, to give you an idea there. To make it even more kind of concrete, the idea, if we looked at iPad Air, 0.29 inches thick, 128 gigabytes they contain. If we were to stack these iPads one on top of the other like so, right, and point this little pillar, this unwieldy pillar towards the moon, this pillar of iPads in 2013 would have got about 2/3 of the way to the moon, so pretty immense in its own right. The firm conviction is that by about 2025, so another 4 years, we're talking about getting 26 times to the moon with that stack of iPads, just to give you a sense of the volume of data, and in particular the growth of volume of data over time. So data, what can we do with it? Where is the business insight here? And just flick on here. So that's really, it's too much data, right? You're in a sea of data if in respect to many questions, trying to elicit the preferences of your customers. So look at all this data. Just what is the meaning of this data? So data is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for us to obtain business insight. A necessary but not a sufficient condition. So what do we need then to really glean the gold that is promised in this data? Well, here is a veritable jungle of algorithms. So we need algorithms. We need some mechanism, some set of rules which can elicit the meaning from these vast quantity of growing data. So here's a jungle of algorithms. And if you were to look at this jungle of algorithms seriously, you would note that actually these algorithms coalesce around 5 ideas. So these 5 ideas, just to be slightly technical for a moment, they're in areas of inverse deduction, backpropagation, they're in areas of genetic algorithms, Bayesian probability, and support vector machines. And if you were to look even more seriously at these families of algorithms, you'd actually find fascinating linkages between these tribes of algorithms. So, all of that is kind of fascinating, but how does that, in my view at least, how does that link in with management in an MBA program? So how does management link into all this? Well, if you look at surveys of corporates and what kind of machine learning algorithms they actually use for different problems, if you look at machine learning competitions on publicly available data, often set by corporates, in fact, one finds that these decision trees here are particularly popular, especially ensembles of decision trees. And indeed, in my own work, ensembles of decision trees often provide very useful and accurate predictions. Okay, so we've got data, which is a necessary condition. We can retrieve meaning from the data via algorithms. So where does management fit into all this? Well, management is absolutely central. It's just not going to happen without people with business domain expertise. And I'm sure many of you could intuit that pretty quickly. So the Forbes provides a cycle. Forbes provides a cycle, a data mining cycle, 6 steps in this data mining cycle. And this is the classic data mining cycle, okay? If you look at the first couple of steps here, it's about business understanding. It's about data understanding. So this is all about business domain expertise. Absolutely vital and really interesting work, no doubt about it. And then on to data preparation and modeling. So you're much more into the data science space. And then the evaluation of the predictive learning model. Again, really very much about management. We've got to know what are the criteria that really matter to the business, and can we fine tune our models in respect to those criteria to impact the business bottom line. And then deployment, scaling up, and another important dimension here is the ethics of any AI implementation in a business setting. So please do keep these 6 steps in mind if you would. So business understanding, data understanding at the start, evaluation, deployment at the end, and that's where management come in. And this is why we're introducing this into our MBA. Now, what's even more exciting here from a management perspective, actually, in a business domain expertise perspective, is that these steps 4, data modeling and data preparation, are becoming increasingly automated. Okay, so the data scientists, in respect to well-defined tasks like customer churn, are becoming increasingly automated. So there's a nice picture here from McKinsey Analytics that say today's successful applied artificial intelligence predictive learning teams are all about data scientists, or significantly about data scientists. But if we look tomorrow, what's going to happen is that the proportion of business domain expertise required for a successful AI project is going to go way up, okay? And the proportion of data scientists required for such a project is going to go way down. So it's really about MBAs, it's about business domain expertise, it's about the management of tomorrow to make these projects will be commonplace. They're going to be inevitable, I think, in your careers over the years ahead. So what have we done? We've indicated, look, data is voluminous. We need algorithms, and I'll get onto this again in a moment when I pull up my sleeves and look at customer churn problems specifically with you. We look at algorithms. We need those to retrieve meaning from all that data. And we need management to actually inform the algorithms, and I'll be very explicit what I mean about that in a moment, and to navigate whether or not to implement the algorithm, how to use any information that arises from the algorithmic work. So I'm going to ask Edel to launch a poll in the background, please. And this poll is about, is your professional experience, okay, I'm sorry, moving around here. In your professional experience, are you aware of predictive analytics use cases? So I'd like to get a sense of whether you, in your professional experience, whether in the pipeline or active, are familiar with predictive analytics use cases. It'd be a very interesting one. And I'll share the result once it pops up on my screen. Now, look at if you look at Microsoft commissioned Ernst & Young surveys of European corporates, you'll find innumerable examples of successful AI in business settings. And here's just some examples I've put up here on the slide for you. If you move into okay, so yes, no, okay, interesting, yeah. So for those of you who perhaps haven't seen this in your professional experience before and would like to know what kind of successful applied machine learning work is going on in your area, I would definitely encourage you to have a look at the Microsoft commissioned Ernst & Young 2019 survey. Okay, that goes through lots of case studies and examples. And those of you who want to go a little bit further into this might look at the Kaggle competitions. So this is where corporates often throw down a challenge, and machine learning teams from all over the world have a go at the challenge, and the best team receives prize and accolades and so forth. Those in banking and finance might find the European Banking Authority report, which is really nice actually on big data and AI to be useful. Okay. So I've highlighted data is important, but only a necessary condition. Algorithms, are also a necessary. So data and algorithms together, we mix that then with the management expertise. Let's make all of this a lot more concrete by focusing in on a specific business problem: customer churn. So customer churn, okay. Okay. Keep an eye on my time. Now, can I use a decision tree to predict customer churn in a telecommunications company? Okay, so I've got some data on customer churn in telecommunications. Decision trees, I mentioned them a little bit earlier, and we'll talk about them now as well. So let's see, can I use a decision tree, a machine learning algorithm, data analytics, to predict customer churn, to predict whether a specific customer, any specific customer, is likely or unlikely to leave the company? Very valuable information. So how do we go about answering this question? Well, we begin, remember, with our Forbes 6-step process. So the first couple of steps were about business understanding, data understanding. So the idea would be that we'd need to get together in order to really think about what are the lead indicators before a customer leaves a company. So, if we had time, we would do this. We would do this together. But I've just pulled together some probable lead indicators in respect to a customer leaving the company, and I put them down here on the slide for you. So we have how support calls, right? How often have they called us in the last year? I mean, if they're calling our call center repeatedly, it may well be the case that they're not altogether happy with us. So the number of support calls in the last year could be useful. How big is the bill? If they're spending a lot of money with us, probably they're not going to leave. But these are all just like hypotheses or suggestions. Of course, it's the data that will tell us, what really is going on. The data in combination with the algorithm. How long has the customer been with us? Okay, so there's possibly an important one. What kind of technology are they using? Are they the kind of customers that come and they go, they come and they go, and they switch between providers? In other words, how old is the customer? Okay, so for various reasons, we might look at customer age. So this is kind of like the theory stage of the applied AI project in respect to, say, customer churn. This is where people really tease out what's the process that leads to a customer walking away from us. The better we understand that process, the better we can identify what are the real lead indicators that we can actually measure, we can use in an applied AI project with a view to predicting this customer churn. So we should really have a look at what a decision tree is for a moment. And what I'm going to do ultimately here is I'm actually going to take some real world data and I'm going to show you the fitting of a decision tree on real world data and how to interpret the result in respect to some of these lead indicators here. So what is a decision tree then before we get on to looking at real world data? So here's a decision tree. It's okay. How will I go about communicating this really rather quickly? We have nodes here, root nodes and decision nodes. Okay, they're the lead indicators. And then we've got leaf nodes at the end. And the leaf nodes actually capture different sets of customers that have different combinations of the lead indicator traits. Okay, so every leaf node captures a different set of customers in respect to a different combination of those lead indicators, right? So if you got lots of calling the support center, and your bill is very, very low, maybe you're about to leave. What I might do actually is I might just switch over here to the whiteboard that I have behind me, so we actually get to have a go at looking at this like we would in a classroom setting. So just bear with me for a moment. Shouldn't take very long. So, okay. Now, so this should work okay. What we have here then is support. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking some of those lead indicators that we would have discussed and teased out in a real classroom setting. Maybe how big is the bill? So support here again is the number of times they've called our support center. How big is the bill? Maybe what's the age of the customer, and so on. You know, as many of these lead indicators as you wish to suggest. What technology is used, you know, whether it's 4G or 5G or I don't know whatever way you want to measure it there, according to business domain expertise. And so that's the classic problem we have. I'm just going to that's the classic problem we have, isn't it? Lots of possibly lead indicators that we intuit might be relevant, but what the machine learning technique does for us is it says, wait now, don't arbitrarily come up with some combination of these lead indicators to provide a flag that somebody might leave, but rather allow the decision tree or the algorithm to elicit that learning from the data. So we might begin with a root node here. That would go down then to maybe decision nodes and ultimately to a leaf. Okay, so root node might be about support. Okay, this is a decision node, maybe that's about bill. So if support is, say, greater than 9, so they called us more than 9 times in the last year, and if the bill is very, very low, I don't know, some arbitrary number like 50, euro in the last year or whatever, then we're down here in all the customers that have called us lots of times, don't spend very much with us. Maybe they're the ones that are actually going to churn, right? We repeat that process through the decision tree. Notice though, we're not repeating the process. It's the machine learning technique that's looking at this very complex problem, drawing together all these lead indicators and finding a good solution that actually predicts with giving us a high quality prediction of the probability of customer churn. So I'm keeping an eye on the time, and hopefully I can kind of toggle through all this pretty quickly. So share screen again. What am I going to do now? I'm going to switch over to this, which is, so this is a statistical software package. This is what I would be using with the MBAs. It's programming free, and we can jump down here to a customer churn problem. We can look at the data together for a moment. So you can see the data, I hope. You'll see here the data. These are all of the different lead indicators that I introduced you to. So you can imagine in your own setting, you'd have a spreadsheet of your customers. You'd against all of the lead indicators that you believe are relevant in your industry. And we can use then we can apply a decision tree then to all of these lead indicators. So without further ado, let's do that. I'm keeping an eye on my time here. So I've just ran a decision tree model. In fact, what I should do is give you a quick look at it. So this is this is retrieving the customer data, all of the lead indicators that you've noticed I've highlighted to you earlier. This is a lot of data preparation. That was step 2. It was step 2, step 3 of the Forbes process. This cross-validation, that just means making sure that whatever predictions we have, testing whether the predictions that we actually have are of high quality or not. So let's run the process and have a look at our first decision tree, among another number of pieces of output as well. So here we go. We have our first decision tree. So notice here what's happening. What I will do, make it a little bit easier for you. We'll remove all of the detail. This here is our root node. these are decision nodes, and the nodes at the end here are leaves. That's where all of the customers end up. If you sum up all the customers, they're accounted for in those leaf nodes at the end. We can pop back in the labels. We can see indeed that the number of support calls is critically important. That's the first split that's suggested by the decision tree algorithm. And then we're on to, you know, average bill being important, and so on and so on. So taking this example here, we can see that, okay, if the support calls last year are let's see, I'll give myself more information here, make it a bit easier, there aren't so many support calls last year, and if the bill is quite high, and again, if there aren't too many support calls, we actually have a false outcome, which means that the person doesn't churn. Okay, so you can see some of the details there. 187 of these customers actually don't churn. What about those that do churn? Well, let's go down here. So we have a different pathway through the decision tree, and decision tree really is just a sequence of if-then functions, okay, which result in a particular subset of the customers. And for any particular customer that you've got standing before you, you can place them in one of these leaves and then produce a prediction. So the question that really might be arising for you at this point is, okay, so this decision tree gives us a prediction at the customer level, but how can we actually rely upon this prediction? What's the quality of the prediction? So in order to get a grip on the quality of the prediction, I should switch over to here. A grip on the quality of the prediction. Okay, I'll indulge myself. I've got about 1 or 2 minutes there. So if I was going to have a look at the quality of the prediction, I should have a look at this thing. Now, what is this thing? This thing is called a confusion matrix. Let's abstract from it because there's a lot of numbers and not so helpful just now, I guess. So what we're going to do is go back to my slides, and we're going to jump on to a generic confusion matrix. What is that? So we had some predictions there about every individual customer according to their lead indicators and whether or not they're going to leave us, whether or not they're going to churn. So we can look at the quality of the prediction through the lens of a confusion matrix. Now, look at the confusion matrix can be fairly literally confusing for the reader in the first instance, but the idea is to assess how confused your machine learning model is. Okay, confusion matrix, how confused your machine learning model is. And there are all kinds of ways of looking at this, but maybe a key one is, well, let's look at all the customers that have left us in the past and how well would our algorithm have done in predicting them actually leaving the company. So what proportion of customers who did leave us were accurately predicted as churn customers in advance using this decision tree? That's a key question, right? What proportion of customers that leave us were actually predicted accurately as leavers, as churners in advance? And actually with this model, we're talking about 83% of customers that leave the telecommunications company could have been predicted as leavers in advance. And that happens, of course, instantaneously, right, with your machine learning model. And by the way, that's a very stable, reliable result via what's called a cross-validation. So it's not just an in-sample result, it's generalizable out of sample. So very valuable. Okay, what can a firm do? So now we're on to the last part of this mini lecture. What can a firm do with this kind of information at the customer level? They're likely to leave us, they're not likely to leave us. Well, one outcome here is price discrimination, okay? So one outcome is, well, why don't we give a discount in price to customers who are likely to leave? And maybe we should increase the price of customers who are going to remain with us, right? Price discrimination. Here's my second poll question for you, if you would. Is price discrimination ethically neutral? Is price discrimination ethically neutral? Well, price discrimination has been pushed to such a level now, arguably in the insurance sector, okay, dual pricing, that the authorities in this space, and I'm looking here at a financial conduct authority, very interested in, so 69% of you would suggest that price discrimination is not unethical, okay? So the the regulators would be in agreement with you, except in the case where there's extreme price discrimination. Okay, so what is extreme price discrimination? Well, you've got a picture here, and this is from the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, and they're looking at UK home insurance prices, and they notice that the longer you stay with the provider of a home insurance, the more expensive it gets. In other words, there's a loyalty penalty, a loyalty pricing penalty, and you can see that there's a 70% loyalty pricing penalty over 5 years of remaining with an insurer. So this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the kind of data analysis that's been underway. But the regulators, including our own Central Bank of Ireland in a big way, are all over this issue now: dual pricing, price discrimination in the insurance sector. Now, I'd like to delve into this ethical aspect. So the point is here, you've got a machine learning model that gives you a prediction of customer churn. And the question is, what can a firm do with this prediction? Well, one idea is they can discriminate across, they can price discriminate. A big issue here from the regulator perspective, also from an ethical perspective, is if you're going to rely on the prediction of your machine learning technique, of your data analysis, your predictive analytics, you need to be able to account for why particular predictions have occurred, and therefore for any decisions you make afterwards. But the problem is that very quickly these machine learning algorithms actually aren't nearly as transparent as that decision tree that I showed you a moment ago. They become opaque. In fact, they become so complex, so full of non-linearities that they're really black boxes. Okay, so these machine learning techniques quickly become black boxes. Inputs here are those lead indicators that I had highlighted to you. Age and number of support calls and so on. And outputs here are whether each and every individual customer is likely to churn, say, in the next 6 or 12 months, okay, depending on how you set up the model. The issue is that if you're predicting excellently whether customers leave the firm or not, that's wonderful. But on what information set did your black box model inform those predictions? Okay, on what information set did your black box model, was your black box model informed has informed those predictions? So the concern here is that the machine learning model could be heavily informed by private, sensitive data, okay? And the exploitation of that data, so what kind of data is this? Perhaps the ethnicity of the customer could be important. Perhaps the gender of the customer could be important. Perhaps maybe the state of religious persuasion of the customer could be important. All very sensitive information. And ethically, it's extremely questionable whether a machine learning model should be entitled to capitalize on that kind of information, discriminate against people. So use their personal information to discriminate against them in respect to price. And the regulators are certainly coming to that conclusion in respect to my impression is they're coming to that conclusion in respect to the insurance sector. So a lot of my research at the moment actually with teams is unpicking this black box. So you may have a machine learning technique that does brilliantly in terms of prediction, but we can actually now use explanatory AI methods to kind of unpick that black box and show where the predictive capacity is actually coming from, right? What are the features that are this impressive prediction power from the machine learning model? And of course, all of that is really going to be required, especially in medical contexts, heavily regulated areas like utility and finance, the extension of credit. So we see that as having a lot of impact in due course. Okay, so what's happened here today then? And I've got a couple of minutes left, I think. So I've tried to give you a sense of the value in data science for businesses. I've highlighted that it's not just the data or big data is the new gold, but it needs to be combined with machine learning algorithms, because otherwise it's just too vast. It's mind-bogglingly vast. However, it's really important to realize, and this is explicitly stated by Forbes, that management is absolutely key, that business domain knowledge is absolutely key to untapping the power of big data, of data in general, with machine learning models. And I hope that our example here with customer churn shows you just where management is key. We've got to decide what are the lead indicators here, and that requires business domain expertise, right? The more of it, the better. And then we've got to actually look at how we're going to evaluate the model, to focus in on what are the key criteria. Should it be the proportion of customers who actually have left us before being predicted accurately in advance? That's a very specific measurement, and we can vary that as well according to business preferences. And then even if we have an excellent piece of applied AI, machine learning, what are the ethical implications of actually implementing this data science for a firm? Are there regulatory implications? If this information becomes revealed to the public at large, perhaps via an enforcement action or a fine, what is the reputational impact for the firm of all this? It's key that management are all over this space. And finally, in respect to ethics, so quickly these machine learning models become highly nonlinear, highly complex, utterly opaque. They're black box models. This is problematic because decisions need to be accountable. They need to be challengeable. And of course, you cannot say that a black box model is accountable. But there is a whole drive in research now in the explanatory AI space with a view to unpicking those black box models. And in the data science class in the MBA, what we'd be doing is introducing you to some of those methods so that you as business domain experts and managers would be aware that, okay, whatever model the data science team is bringing me here, I'm not only able to get involved in the evaluation of it, but also I can draw their attention to methods that can easily be applied to unpick and produce a systematic narrative in respect to how a black box model actually produces its predictions. Okay, I'm way out of time. If you want to learn more about all this, please do come and join us on our MBA program. And if you find all this a bit, I hope that even if you're kind of phobic in respect to applied math and AI and machine learning, that you begin to see in this that actually business domain expertise has a very important role to play in all of this. And well, okay, so I look forward to, I hope, welcoming you to the program at some point. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Cal, so much for that very thought-provoking session on a Saturday morning. I think we're certainly all awake and alert at this stage, so thank you very, very much. Okay, so I just want to move us on now to our next session. So for the last segment today, over the course of the next hour or so, Professor Niamh Brennan will moderate our MBA Thought Leadership panel discussion with the intriguing title, Navigating Boardroom Dynamics. So I'm now going to hand you over to Professor Brennan to introduce herself and to welcome our MBA alumni panelists. And just a quick mention again, we have been answering Q&A through the Q&A box, so please do keep your questions coming in throughout the session, and myself and the team will be on hand to answer. So Niamh, I'm going to hand over to you now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sophie, and good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for attending this event, and I hope that you find this part of the session interesting. I'm the Michael McCormack Professor of Management at University College Dublin. I founded the UCD Centre for Corporate Governance in 2002. We have therefore got considerable expertise in corporate governance in the school. I offer an elective on corporate governance to MBA students. So I'm now going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Sharon.
Hi, Niamh. Yeah, sure. And I'm just to say, I'm unable to put on my camera. It just says that the host has disabled it. So, oh, I'm in business. Just bear with me a second. Yeah. Okay, great. So hi, everybody. And thanks, Niamh. My name is Sharon Cunningham. I'm co-founder of and CEO of Shorla Pharma. It's a specialty pharmaceutical company with a pipeline of products in the oncology space with a particular focus on women's and children's cancers. I'm a chartered accountant by profession. I trained with PwC before joining a pharmaceutical company called Airgen Pharma as their management accountant, and worked my way up there to their head of finance. And it was after I completed my MBA at Smurfit in 2015 that the company that I was working for was sold to a large multinational. And at that point, I started planning with my co-founder, Orla Ryan, to set up Shorla Pharma. We did that 2 years later. So 3 years ago now, we set up the company and we're getting ready to launch our first product in the US this year. In addition to sitting on the board of Shorla Pharma in my capacity as CEO, I also sit on the board of Irish Rule of Law International as a non-executive director. And that is an initiative between the Law Society and the Bar of Ireland. And it's dedicated to harnessing the skills of Irish lawyers tackling global injustice. So I'm delighted to be here to share my experiences with you today.
Thanks very much, Sharon. So John, over to you.
Thanks, Niamh. Hi, my name is John Fitzsimons. Good morning. I suppose my background is a mix between the business world and charity. I did electronic engineering many years ago in UCD in Belfield, and then just over 15 years ago, I did the Executive MBA down in the IFSC in the centre of Dublin at the time. And since I've actually done an executive coaching course. So at the moment, I'm running an organization called Fifth Story, which is really around purpose. So supporting organizations identify what their purpose is in the world, and then also coaching leaders around purpose. So what is their purpose and what should or could their purpose be? In terms of kind of board level experience, up until a couple of years ago, I was CEO of a charity and social enterprise called Kamara Education. So for 8 years, I was reporting into a board. I've also held a number of board positions in the charity area, one being DOCUS, which is an umbrella organization for international NGOs here in Ireland. And I'm on the board of CyberSafe Ireland, which is an Irish charity at the moment. So looking forward to talking this morning. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. So Niamh, over to you, please.
Thanks, Niamh. My name is Niamh Gallagher. I am Head of Public Policy for Amazon Web Services in Ireland as my day job. I did the MBA and finished the Exec MBA in 2014, also down at the IFSC when we had that option. In terms of my board experience, in 2010, I set up Women for Election with Michelle O'Donnell Keating. And we had the privilege of, I suppose, setting up an organisation from scratch, recruiting people to our own board. And now ultimately, since I've moved on from the executive, I'm now on the board of that organisation. I also sit on the board of the Rotunda Hospital. And I was CEO of DrinkAware for 4.5 years, where I reported to a board, which included Professor Niamh Brennan. So I think I'll be able to share some of her forensic sort of approaches as a member of the board. She's someone from whom I learned a lot, not just in the classroom.
Thanks very much, Niamh. And last but not least, Jim.
Morning, Professor. Welcome all. I spent 15 years in the private sector, rising to director in RPS and was on their management board. I completed my MBA in 2014, the executive stream, and directly transitioned after that into the chief executive role of the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, which is a state entity with a budget of about 180 million, so reporting directly into the board in that respect. And now I regulate the energy industry for the past 1.5 years, and I'm involved in quite a bit of governance around that as commissioner, obviously, as well. So that's me. Back to you, Professor.
Thanks very much, Jim. For those on the call, I think our 4 panelists show brilliantly what you could achieve after a UCD MBA. And the range of experiences is just vast, so that you represent. So thank you very much for participating today. So our topic is navigating boardroom dynamics. And this title brings to mind the former chair of the Smurfit School, Niall Fitzgerald, a very, very successful and well-known businessman. And he presented on this topic. But the title that he picked was Scars from the Boardroom. I think it's a very good title because it's not that easy to govern. So starting with my first question, just a very general question, you know, can you let us know what your experience is of the boardroom?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first on that, Niamh, if the others are happy with that. I suppose my first thoughts thinking about this were that there are probably 2 halves to it. One is where you're opportunity seeking and everyone is thinking about an opportunity. The other one is where we're thinking about a risk, or particularly where something has gone wrong. And I think in both cases, interestingly enough, the executive often will identify an opportunity and will be eager to chase it and very enthusiastic. And the board are there to moderate that, to provide a little bit of context, insight, test your assumptions, size the risks appropriately where you might downsize them a little bit, and be objective where perhaps the executive's heart is more in it than their head. And I think the executive, when being challenged on that front, need to remember the board aren't there to burst your bubble. They're there in your interest, in the organization's interest. And I think where the scars really come in is where something goes wrong. And the executive tends to want to jump to solutions mode because they believe they understand the problem immediately and implicitly. The board needs to understand the problem. And because of that, they will proceed by inquiry. They will want to find out the causal factors, the structures around what was in place. And occasionally that sort of questioning can feel quite personalized. And you need to remember that it's not witch hunting. Inquiry isn't necessarily antagonistic. And if the executive move to a defensive place, it can actually come across as evasiveness. So it is that method of test and challenge from board to the executive and how that relationship develops in the cauldrons of opportunity and in the cauldrons of when something goes wrong, and then also over the longer term that I think is most interesting to me. It's the relationship dynamic there. And can you get that balance right between openness, trust, and challenge, you know?
Thank you, Jim. You're describing what is probably one of the number one roles of a board, which is risk management. And you're describing the execution of that role. Anybody else?
Niamh, if I might just, or Sharon, do you want to go ahead?
By all means, please work away.
Just maybe to build on the point that Jim was making about opportunity. I think one of the things that I learned, certainly the hard way over the years when being chief executive or director, executive director, was the importance of what happens outside the room in relation to framing an opportunity. And certainly Michelle and I, when we set up Women for Election, were initially so enthusiastic. And to Jim's point, you know, we had superb ideas, and at times we brought them to the board with that bubbling enthusiasm, but without, I suppose, having socialized the ideas with certain board members, and ideally even the chair outside the room. And after a couple of years, it became really obvious to us that was critical. And then in time, you know, when presenting kind of big ideas, particularly with the spend associated, taking time to identify the board members that would likely champion them, anticipate the questions that board members would ask, and you know, address them with them offline as you introduced it. So in a way, I think there's a little bit of theatre about the board when you're a CEO, where you have done a little bit of work, you know, kind of in the practice, the pre-meeting, where people kind of know their lines a little bit. And you've also, I suppose, shown a little bit of respect to board members to ask for their view beforehand, seek their input, address concerns they might have. So certainly when I think of kind of scars to your language, Niamh, anything that went wrong that I can think of kind of went wrong because it was a surprise. And there are enough surprises when you're on a board. You can get a horrible media story of a morning. You know, someone can say something about you weren't anticipating. If key member staff can leave, make sure that the surprises that don't have to be surprises are managed. And that has worked well for me.
To that, Niamh, if that's okay, everything that Jim and Niamh have said has really resonated with me here this morning. And particularly, I think, as a co-founder of a company where, you know, myself and my co-founder, we set the vision, we set the strategy, we then chose our investors based on what we wanted to do, and we chose the best people that we felt, you know, for that role, and then handpicked our board of directors. And, you know, that took a huge amount of time. And then going into a board meeting, a brand new dynamic with all these new opinions, and in terms of how we as the executive team display our accountability, get our points across, take responsibility for what we have presented, and not get defensive when we're challenged. And that has been a huge learning curve. Because, you know, and exactly what Niamh said, you know, preventing those surprises. And we made that blunder. We did, you know, we went into the board meeting without having spoken in advance to each of the board members. And it's not that, you know, you're expecting that you go into the board meeting and they're all going to agree with you because you've told them in advance. Absolutely not. And you don't want that. You want them to challenge you. You need them to challenge you. That's why they're there. But that, you know, if they're not kind of reading something or hearing something for the first time in the board meeting, it means that they have considered it and their challenge is considered and it's based on, you know, having thought about it properly. And so there's responsibility on you as the executive to prepare a detailed board pack in advance and have those conversations in addition to your board pack to provide context. I think that's hugely important.
Yeah, on that, I remember like my prep for board meetings started about a week before, where I'd get on the phone to the chair and we'd discuss, you know, what are the 1 or 2 strategic items that needed covering. Because I think the risk as well in board meetings is if, you know, you go in with a board report, they can go any which way, but you really have to present to the board members what is it you want from them. And obviously they have their duties in terms of, you know, managing the risk and governance, but you want to be clear about what you're asking, the input for them. And yeah, I just echo the other speakers around, I suppose, the preparation needed in advance and building the relationships outside of the meeting. I remember in Kamara Education, I had one very outspoken, amazing director who used to fly in from the UK just for the board meeting. And I made a point on board days of actually collecting him from the airport and bringing him for lunch, because he'd have my board report printed out and he'd have about 20 specific comments that probably could have, you know, consumed half a board meeting. And he'd work his way through those over the lunch. And, you know, I'm not saying I just placate him or mute him then in board meetings. He couldn't do it if he tried. But he'd at least have probably the top 3 points then to bring to the board meeting. And I would have at least had a couple of hours to get my head around some of the curveballs he might have in his mind about throwing it out. So, and that's really, yeah, I mean, there's a more general point there around relationships. You know, I had a particularly good relationship with this board member, and his insight and input was really brilliant. But it's really about making sure that it isn't just, you know, you're not seeing these people just every 2 months just for the board meeting, but really to find opportunities to I suppose build those relationships. For example, in the same organization, a lot of the work we did was in Africa, and we used to bring the board out to Africa every 2 years, obviously to see the work that was being done, but also to build those relationships over the course of a number of days, so that you really got a sense of who these people were, why they were sitting on the board, and their perspective. And all of that really helped, I suppose, the organization and being able to focus on, you know, getting the best then from them. So yeah, really reiterating the points around kind of preparation and relationships are kind of key.
Thank you, John. This discussion reminds me that on a good board, most of the board work happens outside the formal board meetings, and that's what you're describing. The other thing that you're describing is the need to build trust, because there has to be really great trust between the executives and the non-executives. And you were describing your efforts to build trust on whichever side of the table you're on. There are a lot of people on this call who may in the future be asked to join a board. What lessons would you share with them from the boardroom?
I'm happy to start. At least I'll be briefer than last time. The first thing I would say is that you need to be into it. You need to have a passion for what you're going into. You need to be interested in the organization, in the market they're working in, and that's fundamental. And the reason I think that's fundamental is that there can be a tendency sometimes towards a transactional execution of board meetings and a transactional relationship with board members, where it becomes this sort of syncopation of monthly board meetings, and there is a board pack, and that external to the board meeting relationship doesn't develop. And I think 2 things can happen as a result. The first thing is that there are surprises, both good and bad, in board meetings, which aren't helpful for anyone. You don't get that sense of trust and openness and transparency developing. And the other thing is that it sets a tone in the organization, and I think it can be a tone where the board, and by association governance, is considered an administrative burden, nearly, as opposed to a method of building trust within and outside the organization in order to drive value for the organization. So I think you need to want to do it. You need to want to put time into it, and not just into reading a board pack and sitting in a board meeting. You really need to have your enthusiasm in place. And I think I referred when we had a chat last week to this perhaps typecasting, where I studied as an engineer initially. Sharon is a chartered accountant, and occasionally when you walk into a board meeting, people will say, oh, well, there's the engineer and there's the accountant, and they can expect, and heads can turn towards you for that type of expertise, where you're not just there for that. And I don't think you should feel pigeonholed necessarily for just providing that type of input. A good chair will draw the best parts of us out, but I think we all need to be conscious of that.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, I think the importance of the chair is really, key in terms of, if you're the chief executive, obviously that's the primary relationship, is the chair and the chief executive, and that's something that needs investment. But to have a really good chair makes such a difference on a board. I remember, again, same organization in Kamara Education, I brought a strategic point to the board around our global footprint. At the time, we were in 10 countries in Africa and Caribbean. We were, relatively small organization, but growing. So we had this kind of diverse board, which of course is great. And we had a couple of entrepreneurs, like the gentleman I talked about that came over from the UK. And the entrepreneurial attitude was, we need to be in at least 10, we're taking over the world. While I think some of the more logical and sensible board members were saying, well, let's try and, walk before we can run here. So we had this discussion ensued on the board meeting, which of course was great. And the purpose of the board is to have this discussion about these strategic items. And both sides were going, going at it fair and square. And I was just thinking at the time, I'm really glad I'm the chief executive and not the chair. But thankfully, with this brilliant chairwoman, Maria Mahan was her name, and she managed to solicit, I suppose, the input from everybody, make everybody felt heard, and somehow, I don't really know how, but managed to navigate a path forward from all these diverse opinions that actually, ultimately served the organization the best, but also made sure that people felt heard and their contributions were actually, I suppose, very much heard. So for me, a key learning is about having a super chair, but also, and it's a very distinct skill set, because a lot of people on the board have strong opinions, and actually you're nearly better off not having a chair with strong opinions and being more of an enabler, facilitator of these discussions. So to have a really strong chair, but and then to really build that relationship and make sure that as chief executive, you're really close to that person.
I would echo all of what Jim and John has said, and in particular, I would say that my biggest learning, without a doubt, has been the fact that I probably underestimated the power and the importance of the relationship between the CEO and the chair, and it took me, a little bit of time. Me as a CEO, it made me realize the importance of, being passionate about the problem you're trying to solve, but being emotionally detached from the solution. And having a chair that encouraged that attitude was extremely important. This relationship with the chair, it takes time, no different to any relationship in your life. You do need to take the time to nurture it, to keep that person abreast of changes, progress, challenges, and so on. It's much more than, a board is much more than a group of critical decision makers sitting in a room. They should be systems and kind of social systems built on trust and accountability, transparency, hugely important, and fantastic communication. And those positive relationships that are formed, I really believe are key to the future success of the company.
Niamh, just thinking about people on the call who may be invited to join a board, and maybe just taking that, particularly from the non-profit sector, I suppose, and thinking about the last 10 years of that in Ireland. I think there was, a time when it was sort of do your bit and you're asked to join a board and you join and you show up on a Tuesday night and someone gives you the papers and that's fine. I think there's been a huge shift, and I think the fundamental lesson for me is, if you're asked to join a non-profit board, indeed any board, but I can speak from this experience, is to do your due diligence first. And if you think back to the CRC rehab boards that had excellent people on them, but things were going on behind the scenes that some board members were very surprised when those were exposed. And the responsibility rests ultimately with those board members. So in the first instance, I think, there are the obvious steps, which involve kind of reading the accounts over the last couple of years, talking to the chair, but I think you need to be a little bit more forensic. I think you need to identify people who've been involved with the organisation in the past, seek to have a conversation, get a little bit more sense of the sector. Where the organisation sits within the sector, that kind of thing, because the responsibility, and particularly now with the charities regulator and so on, is very significant. So really, I think due diligence is key. Then I think preparation. I mean, signing up to a board and then not having the time to prepare in advance of a meeting means that you're not making your contribution as a board member. And there is a lot of preparation in my experience. You know, the Rotunda board, for example, at the moment meets once a month for 2.5 hours. There's everybody is also on a committee that meet once a month for 2 hours. Each meeting has kind of significant preparation. So you do have to be able to give that time. And I think, be honest, if you can't, now's not the time to be a board member. And then I suppose, even though it nearly goes against the grain because your role is governance, I think when you first join the board, it's important to listen and to watch and to understand a little bit how that board operates. Not to say that you just need to fit into the culture as it is, your role is to challenge, but you know, rather than kind of feel I'm here and I need to make my impact, boom, you're going to be on the board, you would expect, for a minimum of 3 years or ideally 2 terms. And so just getting a feel, I think, from the outset is important.
Thanks, Niamh. Just to kind of put some shape on some of the things you said, Jim, you're talking about, you know, it being transactional, which is not good. And in the academic literature, there's a reference to the performativity of governance, that people are just going through the motions. It's not a proper engagement, it's just transactional. And so that's what your comment, Jim, brought to mind. In relation to the chair and then the chair-CEO relationship, the chair is sometimes described as being the conductor of the orchestra. And I think that's a nice metaphor to describe the critical role of the chair. In relation, Niamh, to joining a board, here's my advice. Be afraid. My first question, if I'm asked to join a board, is, you know, who else is on the board? Am I going to be working with people who share my value system? Because at the end of the day, when things go wrong, it does nearly always come down to the people around both the executive team and the boardroom. In every single corporate governance code, one issue is emphasized as important in the boardroom, and that is the question of constructive challenge of the non-executive directors by the executive of the non-executive directors, by the non-executive directors of the executives. And there is absolutely nothing in the literature or anywhere which actually says how you do that. So I'd be interested, and some of you have already touched on it, I'd be interested in your experiences of, you know, good challenge, not so good challenge, good management response, not so good management response.
I think a couple of reflections I've had in different board meetings from the executive side, particularly with what we're talking about, is you will have board members who let their advice monster run free, and they have excellent experience directly relevant to your organization. They have competencies that are a perfect fit for the organization, the type of advice you're trying to get from them. But delivery and tone can actually take away from the advice being given. And I think that the delivery and tone by INEDs in particular needs to be just right. So it needs to be, again, procedure by inquiry, and almost cajoling the executives to think about the next step and think about the next step. And it's a more instructive type of leadership, perhaps. That said, I do think there are times when independent non-execs need to speak very plainly and need to pull the executive up. So I think it's it's a sort of balance that needs to be struck. But there can be challenges sometimes where NEDs will just lecture, if I can put it that way, as opposed to draw things out, you know, and I think that you're not getting best value if that's the way things are going. I think the executive can try to move them into that mode of inquiry. It is really a role for the chair to make sure that there's balance in how it's being delivered, though, and a good chair themselves will provide a little bit of coaching to both the executive outside the boardroom and to the INEDs outside the boardroom as well. But a key thing again for the executive is not to take inquiry as antagonism, and remain open to it, and understand that your board are there because they have peripheral vision that you do not, and you're there to learn. But it is a balance that really needs to be struck, you know, and it can be a challenge. It really can.
Yeah, I've experienced on both sides of that coin, if you like, and I do remember as chief executive before, my chair did have a little quiet coaching word with me at one moment where she told me I just need to listen a little bit more, you know, because I suppose you have people coming in for board meetings every 2 months and you're on the coalface with your team every single day, and you know, while these people are superb and very passionate and experienced, etc., you know, it's easy to get sensitive, and it's easy to take some of the feedback sensitively, and I suppose it's really important that you, I suppose, get out of yourself in the sense of kind of extract yourself emotionally from these scenarios and let them have their say, you know, and acknowledge and appreciate that, even if you don't always fully row in behind it. And I suppose on the other side of the coin, then coming in as kind of non-executive director in certain organizations, it's I'm just personally, I'm very conscious of how, as Jim says, how feedback and my thoughts are delivered, because it can be incredibly frustrating as an executive team to have, you know, these people coming in every 2 months or month or 2 months and, you know, think they know it all and have all the answers to everything, when actually in reality, like most problems, is you know, it's a lot more complicated than that. But I think it's a slight tangent, but I think a key thing for me is around kind of values and behaviors. I mean, I remember in this same organization, I was pursuing this very successful businessman who sold his company for $100 million to IBM. And I asked him, how did you do it? And he said, well, he said he doesn't use the word values, he uses the word behaviors, but he set the behaviors, he defined the behaviors in the organization, you know, customer focus, etc., you know, hardworking, blah, blah, blah. Well, I can't rehash all of them now. And he said they were just relentless on those. He, as a leader, and then everybody in the organization pursued those. And that really was a key turning point for me, because I really focused then on values and behaviors. What are they? What should they be? And really what I was looking from the board at the time was really, I suppose, validation of those, but also to lead from those. And even the decisions that they were making were executed against those. So yeah, that was the key thing for me, because it framed the discussions at board level.
I might answer next, and just in terms of how, as an executive director, you respond to challenge and questioning in the boardroom. I think it, you know, obviously it's to be expected, it's to be encouraged, but it should be done in a very respectful manner. The questions should be based on fact and logic, not anyway personal or emotional. And I think as an executive member, if you do find that a non-executive is turning up unprepared, hasn't read the board pack, for whatever reason, you know, is asking questions that really they should know the answers to based on having been at previous meetings or, you know, having read the board pack. And, you know, if that person is questioning in a disrespectful manner, I think you're well within your rights to take that up with the non-executive director, you know, and I do think you need to tackle it early on and be very clear what the expectation is. And to ensure that, you know, you nurture a trustful relationship with that particular person. It's a two-way thing, that relationship. And, you know, I think feedback along the way from both sides is extremely important to ensuring the long-term success of the relationship and, you know, a functioning board.
Yeah, maybe just to illustrate kind of good challenge, bad challenge. I think, Niamh, one of my examples of challenge would be from you when you were a member of the Drinkware Board, which was, if I recollect, you weren't satisfied with how the quarterly financials were presented. And it wasn't necessarily that they were messy, or you weren't getting the information you wanted from the way I was presenting the material. So kind of you asked questions that were not immediately answerable from what was in front of you. And then you offered to help prepare them in a way that would answer those questions for the next iteration. And I think it took maybe 2 or 3 times of presenting the figures to get to a point where you felt they were sufficient to deal with the risk question, which was, you know, is the money going to run out? And can we still make our staffing decisions in the way that we are, given the commitment of our funders over a period of time? And it sounds kind of basic, but I was kind of working on them on a way that they were going to feed into the annual accounts. So it was sort of the repeated questioning in a way that demonstrated what was being put in front of you didn't give you what you needed as a board member. And then the offer of, let me help you, give me what I need. So that for me was good challenge. And then I think bad challenge speaks to kind of to what Jim talked about a little bit, which is sometimes you end up with a board member or a number of board members that have a particular type of expertise that may be more operational than strategic. And it can get confused that they're on the board for their strategic input rather than their operational expertise. And I have experienced that on a couple of occasions with people with a communications background, where they will, their value is contributing on a communication strategy, but actually at a board meeting, they will get involved in tweets, blog posts. You know, I observed this tweet went out by the organization and, you know, I thought it could have been done this way, or that's not the role of a board. And I think that is difficult if a chair doesn't step in for a CEO to say to a board member, you know, that's your opinion, but that's not really why you're here. So I think getting too much into the weeds of the operations in something that isn't strategy is bad challenge, and pushing the executive to deliver material that helps the board make decisions about risk is good challenge.
Niamh, thank you for remembering my challenge on the where I knew with the chief executive. And here's my reflection on that. You had been a student in my corporate governance module on the MBA, and there was a really solid social chemistry established between us, which led to trust, which meant that when I asked the question and the interaction between us, that we had a really great social chemistry as a solid foundation on which I could ask the awkward question and you were comfortable in not interpreting it as too awkward. I say to MBA students, and you'll remember this from your MBA days, that, you know, do you have to work in groups on the MBA? Yes, Niamh. Did your group work well? No, not really, Niamh. I said, now you know what it's like to be on a board of directors, because really all it is a group of people trying to work together. And in order to try and improve my own understanding of what I consider to be a total mystery of the world. I mean, I'm a chartered accountant as well. I have a PhD in accountancy, etc. But there's one complete mystery of the world as far as I'm concerned, and that is the human being. So I'm just in my last year of a master's in coaching, which is trying to teach me to understand human beings, to improve my emotional intelligence. And Sharon, you mentioned about not getting emotional around the boardroom. Yes, I agree with that, but not getting emotional, but having very high levels of emotional intelligence to sense where other people are coming from. And John, I know that you also, I'm doing my master's in Smurfit. I don't know where you did yours, but you did a degree in coaching as well? Yeah, and the Smurfit as well, yeah. Yeah. Great.
A question popped in there, Niamh, actually, and just when you mentioned EQ or EI, emotional intelligence, it was someone reflecting on how has the pandemic influenced the dynamic in board meetings. And popped in an answer, and I just said that it's amazing how you lose non-verbal cues and non-verbal communication. And there's so much we pick up in body language, the tone and temperature in a room, the slight intake of breath when you know the usual agent provocateur wants to come in and make their comment. And you do lose that a little bit. And I think another thing that you can lose sometimes is the energy and enthusiasm in a board. So again, energy and enthusiasm are separate things to emotion, you know, and you can lose that. So, you know, frequent regular breaks to keep that energy high, keep focus and concentration high can be quite important. And I think there are things we can reflect on even after COVID shuffles off this mortal coil, you know, that there are certain methods we learned while being distant in these meetings that we could bring back to board meetings, you know. And again, it's just a reflection on sometimes where we have structures and processes and systems with regards to governance and boards. They're really important. They provide us with that space to perform within. But if people just rely on those structures and processes and systems and think that that deals with it, you're not going to get the value out of it. Again, if you take it that, well, I've read the board pack and I will attend the meeting, that's not it. It's like having an excellent risk management system within an organization, and people always execute the risk management process and system, but do they still think about the risks anymore? Or do they just update the sentence, update the paragraph, and it reports into the spreadsheet, and if it's above a certain score, it goes to corporate, and it's fine, that's grand, it'll get picked up. Do I still think about the risk? Am I bringing that human element to it?
Yeah.
And I think it's challenging.
This is where, Sharon, I'm actually not convinced about this mantra, which I'll be politically incorrect, and I wonder whether it comes largely from the male of the species. But I'm not convinced that, you know, being unemotional is what's needed in business. Because on the other hand, you have people saying, bring your whole self to work. Leave your emotions out of it. So which is it? You know?
Niamh, what I meant by that was being emotionally detached from the solution. So while being totally emotionally and passionately immersed in the problem, it's being able to step back from the solution and that's really what I meant by that. So but I certainly think I do agree with you, and I think the pandemic has been a reminder to us and really has emphasized the fact that people's guards have come down somewhat. You know, we're being our true selves. You know, we're in our homes, our children are appearing on our Zoom calls, our pets are around or whatever. And so while human interaction is way down, I feel like human connection has gone way up as a result. But yeah, it's certainly, I think it's an interesting debate.
Yeah. So I've introduced a politically incorrect comment in relation to the male of the species. So that kind of leads us on nicely to the issue of kind of diversity in the boardroom.
Yeah, sure. And I'm happy to jump in with a response on that particular one. So, diversity in the boardroom, from having been on an all, or actually I was an observer at the time on an all male board, it was something that was extremely important to me when forming my own board, gender diversity in particular. So, just to explain, 3 of the 7 of us are women, 2 of whom are the co-founders, but it was important for us to get that third woman. So not only gender, but also culturally. So we have an American, we have a Canadian citizen of Indian descent, and then we have Irish people. And it's that mix of cultures, different backgrounds, the different skills and knowledge that all of us bring, really, I think, will enable us to turn our ideas into commercial realities. So diversity also in terms of stage of career, and we were very targeted about who we approached. So just to explain who sits on my board, so my company is a relatively early stage. We're still a startup. We're pre-commercial, but that didn't stop us from attracting a chairperson of a current FTSE 100 company. He also sits on another FTSE 100 company. And while some might say, why would that person have an interest in joining your board? Well, you don't ask, you don't get, and we did, and we managed to secure that person. And you know what that person brings, even though he's not in our exact industry in terms of the pharmaceutical industry, but it's that diverse perspective. It's the governance, the operational, the strategic stuff that applies to every business in every industry. And that has been very, very powerful so far for us. Yeah, no, and don't get me wrong, diversity also can be challenging. And I think that particularly in the early days of forming a board, you know, it takes time to get to know each other, to get used to each other's different perspectives, different cultures, particularly, you know, if you're on different time zones and, you know, all of those factors. But I think over time, you know, the benefits outweigh the challenges, certainly.
Sharon, I might come in on that point as well, because I had two kind of quite interesting experiences recently in relation to diversity on a board. So we had the Board of Women for Election, which was pretty much the founding board that Michelle and I recruited in 2010. So all very committed to the organisation, its vision, which is to get more women into elected politics, and grew up with the organisation. So put a lot of trust in Michelle and I, and kind of had that passion. And about 3 years ago, we decided we needed to grow the board and we wanted to bring some more diverse perspectives. And we invited Senator Lynn Ruane to join the board, and she agreed. And Lynn arrived, and she won't mind me saying, you know, kind of from the first day, just said, guys, girls, whatever's the correct terminology, you know, we need to shake this up. You know, you're similar. You've been around for a long time. She was very open that she came to the board as a working class woman who was representing a different group to the group she saw us representing, and that we needed to diversify, to speak more articulately, and to reach into the communities that Women for Election should be seeking to represent. And that has been her big push since she joined the board. And since then, we've added a traveller woman. We've added a migrant woman, we've added a much younger woman, and we always had a man, Derek Hill, who's now the president of DCU, and he used to get great laughs out of being the token man. But the board has changed fundamentally for the better. And, you know, we have real challenge from different individuals on different issues, but a really strong push around, we're not just trying to get more women into politics, we're trying to get women from all different types of communities, women in all our diversity is the way we describe it. And Yara, Maria, Lynn, they are pushing that agenda really hard in a way that on reflection, we weren't pushing hard enough. And I see we were kind of wave one, which was just, let's get women in and let's not even think past layer one. But now we're in phase two, we're 10 years in, and it's added an extraordinary richness, and particularly the age dimension. Two much younger members of the board in their early 20s. You know, politics is totally different. It's much more activism driven, much more issue driven, completely online, you know, versus kind of me, who's only not that much older than I would like to think, but probably realistically speaking, you know, nearly 20 years older than them, where it's much more the door-to-door canvassing. So those perspectives are extraordinary. And then the second experience is in relation to the Rotunda board, where I was invited to join that board because the board had undergone a governance review and had reflected that it needed to change its governance structures. It has a number of people who've been on the board for many years who are extraordinarily committed, but they also wanted a refresh. But the piece they picked out was they had no women on the board who had given birth in the hospital in the last almost 40 years. And yet the constituency they're seeking to serve are those very women. So I joined the board. Nyasa Hurricane, who's the Green Party TD for the area, joined at the time. She then got elected. She was a councillor at the time, and she's been replaced by Councillor Darcy Lonergan. Hazel Chu is also now an honorary member of the board. So and there's another woman called Lucinda Woods, who's also on the board, comes with a finance background. So from 0 women who had given birth in the hospital in recent years, they added 4. And that has brought a perspective that is very much about, what does it feel like to be in the hospital and experience this service? And when I was there, that's what it felt like. And that's not the only reason we're there. And we have to be careful about that too. But definitely the chair would reflect that it has shifted, you know, a little bit how things are looked at around the board table.
I'd only add to what Sharon and Niamh have said that there are lots of different dimensions to diversity. There is gender, which is a key priority right now. There's experience, competency, culture, age. And I think it is right to seek diversity. And when you achieve that in the board, you're only a third or a half of the way there. What you're really looking for is to deliver value from that diversity. And I think the role of the chair again in that is critical, because there will be now a balanced and diverse portfolio of views around the table, and you need to draw that out. And sometimes you need to find the counterbalance between different points in that diversity around the board. And that can be quite challenging. You know, it isn't just an orchestra of violins, Niamh. There are oboes, there are violas, there's a double bass and a couple of timpanis down the back who like making noise. So to find that balance is quite important, you know.
Yeah, and I think a really good chair will do that. I think a really good chair will say, listen, we have a great diverse board with lots of different opinions, and you know, it's okay to disagree. It's okay for people to have different perspectives, and what we want is the best outcome, you know, to come from those. So yeah, I think it's absolutely essential. I think one of the biggest risks for boards is just it stays the same, and it's clones bringing in more clones, and you end up, you know, kind of tunnel thinking. It you know, it really has to be diverse, and it has to include, as Niamh said, I think the beneficiaries or the clients, you know, whichever is appropriate in the scenario.
I remember a well-known Irish businessman saying at an event I attended, we don't want anybody with sharp elbows around our boardroom table. Otherwise expressed as, we just want the cozy club. And people like Lynn Ruane who are willing, who have the bottle to stir it up, which out of stirring it up, something emerges that's positive and valued. So I really liked those little anecdotes. I'm going to end up with a question not relating to corporate governance, but relating to your MBA. Because there are people on the call who are thinking about doing an MBA in the Smurfit School. And one of the things that the challenges is how you finance it. How you, for example, persuade an employer to finance your MBA. So have you any advice to people on the call on that point?
Yeah, I can come in there, Niamh. Like, firstly, and I haven't been told to say this, but I would highly recommend doing an MBA. Like that job, CEO of Camara for 8 years, I know I would not have got that job without an MBA. And the reason being is I had engineering, I had various domain expertise. I had no finance, no HR, no operations. And an MBA didn't make me a PhD in any one of them, but it gave me sufficient insight to know what I was talking about as I led a team. And I think, so it opened those doors to me, but also what was probably more important on it, that what I learned is who I met. And even though it's over 15 years ago, you know, there's some great people I'm still in contact with, and I learned so much from who I was working with. And as you say, it's highly collaborative, so you do learn a lot. At the time, I was relatively early in my career. So in terms of financing it, you know, I had a conversation with my employer at the time and said, you know, do you want me here kind of in the medium and long term? And, you know, they were saying all the right things, and we're saying yes. And I said, well, this is something I want to do. And are you prepared to come to the table? And as it turns out, they basically co-funded it with me. So that was sufficient for me to make the jump. And you know, I think there's always a way around these things. So I'd encourage those open conversations with employers as a way of maybe, you know, getting the assistance needed to get it over the line.
Yeah, go for it, Niamh.
Jim, I'll be brief. Just to say, I was the recipient of a scholarship, and UCD have an extraordinary number. In fact, when you look at the various MBAs of scholarships, at the time there was Image Magazine. I know now there's News Talk. I won the Aspire Scholarship, which there's 10 of those per year, and they fund half of the program. So I had to then finance the other half. My employer was non-profit, so not in a position to support. But what the board at the time did agree was that I could take some time. So that was really valuable to me, you know, that while they weren't able to give money, that I could take a day a week to focus on my MBA work was really positive. And I took a loan from the bank for the other half. And I guess I hedged that if I did the MBA, I would earn more afterwards and subsequently be able to repay it. And you know, that did happen. So it is expensive. You know, it's difficult to look at it and say, oh, just go for it. I think it needs to be acknowledged that it's a big financial commitment. But in my experience, and certainly when I think around my class, it has paid off in terms of the positions they have secured, and it was worth the risk financially at that point.
Yeah, I think for me, at the time, I would have had 2 kids under 4 and a third on the way, so we didn't have a lot of money hanging around the house, and we considered it an investment, and it's an investment in time, in emotion, and in money. And if anyone is looking at doing an MBA, think about the investment you're going to make and the return you want to get. And I suppose in talking to your employer, when you've done that value proposition for yourself on the investment, think then on if you receive that value of knowledge, of balance, of experience with teams that you mightn't have had in a while, what value does that generate for your employer? And you need to create a different value proposition to them. You need to think about it from their perspective. What are they lacking? What do they need? Not just to make the organization stickier to me now, but can I actually create value from them as I do the MBA and extract value? And then the final point I would make, and Niamh would have observed this as well, we were about the same vintage in the executive MBA. When you go in there, if you're just going in there to get 3 extra letters after your name, there are a lot cheaper ways of doing that. You know, like you really need to go in there open to learning, open to challenging yourself, and to have other people challenging yourself, and then you'll get the value out of it. So getting in the door and getting the finance in place again is maybe a quarter of what you should be thinking about. Actually learning while you were there and really leaning into it is very important. The amount you learn from not just the academic staff and the coursework, but from your colleagues in the class is incredible. And I think you need to be open to all of those learnings, but it is an investment. And think about the value proposition, and then think about how your employer perceive that value proposition to them. So think as selfishly as you can from their perspective, and it'll get you a couple of more rungs along the way.
Totally agree with what Jim and all the panelists have said about the MBA. And for me, you know, I highly, highly recommend the MBA. It has been fundamental to my success so far. It was tough. You have to really, really want to do it. You have to be, you know, really passionate about it. I decided that I wanted to do it while I was on maternity leave with my first child. I went back to my employer and I worked on a proposition while I was on maternity leave. I really had time to think and understand why I wanted to do it, how it could add to the organization, and how I could sell it to the CEO at the time. We were gearing up to sell the company at the time. I had recently been promoted to their head of finance. But it was an easy enough sell because of the fact that the 2 co-founders of that company had done an MBA and the business had come out of the MBA, and they could see the benefits, you know, firsthand of it. I started my MBA when I was pregnant on my 2nd child, and then I was pregnant on my 3rd by the time I graduated. So for all you women out there, don't let you know, the fact that you're of childbearing age or that you're planning a family turn you off either. It has opened endless doors for me, and it continues to open doors for me. And I'm very grateful to the team at Smurfit for all the support they continue to give as well.
It is lovely as a lecturer on the MBA to hear such incredibly positive comments about your experience. I love my job, and I love the fact that you can make a difference in people's lives in a real way. So thank you for your very positive comments. And I'm going to wrap up this session by saying thank you again to the people at the very extraordinarily large number of people who are on the call. I hope they found our conversation useful. I absolutely loved talking to our 4 panelists. They really shared such fabulous insights and such personal experiences. So I thank you very much. It was great to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Good to catch up.
Thanks, Niamh. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Niamh, and thank you to our panelists for all your time this morning. We really appreciate it, and that was a really fascinating discussion. Thanks so much, Niamh, and we'll see you soon, hopefully in person. Okay, so just as we're coming towards the end of this morning, I just want to invite my colleagues Jessica and Professor Muckley back to the session. And what we're going to do is field some questions from our audience. We've been answering them, as I mentioned, throughout the morning. And my colleague Kathy on the marketing team, Kathy is there also, Kathy. So I know that you have been keeping an eye on the questions for us. So, I mean, do you want to let us know what the questions are? And I'll maybe kind of ask who might be most appropriate to answer those if we can.
Sure, Sophie, thank you so much. Yeah, obviously a lot of questions on admissions, which Jess has and Elaine have addressed on the chat function. But one actually just, Cal, in relation to the data analytics module and your lecture this morning, there was a question around opportunities for practical experience on live projects as part of the business analytics module. If perhaps you could give some insight or examples of that.
Okay, as part of the data analytics module, there would be an abundance of opportunity to work on real-world data sets in respect to real-world problems. Okay, these are not live as we go in companies. Now, elsewhere in the MBA, there are projects, group projects, and in there you can certainly bring your data analytics skill set, and you may well have good opportunities to work on live projects in that regard. But within the module itself, it's all about showing you on quite a large set of real-world data sets in respect to problems across business, HR, finance, marketing, and let you see just how this data science can give business insight that's actionable. And you bring that with you then to the other projects and ultimately to the job market.
That's great. Thanks so much, Cal. Plenty of questions around the Modular Exec MBA, which obviously we're launching and inviting our first intake this September. What will the continuous assessment for this new program entail? Perhaps, Sophie, that's something you could talk to.
Yeah, I could certainly give a flavour, Cal, maybe able to speak to that also. But I suppose continuous assessment is essentially the assessment of the module. So each module is assessed individually, because we did have one question where someone was wondering, was there assessment across modules? So each module is assessed individually. An assessment can be broken down typically into a number of components. Yeah, and those components really depend on the individual module, the nature of the module, and the individual kind of faculty member and how they see best, to kind of assess the module. But for example, to give people a flavor of continuous assessment, so continuous assessment would be assessment that's not a final exam, essentially. So the focus would be more on continuous assessment for this modular EMBA for obvious reasons, I guess. So each module, would have usually some element of group work, a group type project. It could typically have an individual type assignment based around maybe a business challenge. There may be a presentation element, there may be a report. So these would be the kind of types of examples, but obviously each module is going to be different. I don't know, Cal, if you want to add to what I've said.
It's fairly comprehensive, but I guess one part of the question there was, are there assessments across modules? In a sense, the capstone project and the international consulting projects, I mean, the notion here is that you're introduced to all these modules, all these HR modules and finance and general management and strategy and so on. And you bring all of your learning together to address, live problems in the capstone project. And thereby you are assessed across modules in those applied project assessments.
Great, thanks, Cal. So hopefully that's a comprehensive answer. But as for the specific details, obviously, once we are closer to the time, you'll be able to look on our website and click into each kind of module to see how that breaks down. So hopefully that's enough detail for that person. Thanks, Kathy.
Great, thanks, Sophie. Obviously, you know, this year with the pandemic, a lot of the course delivery has been virtual. So what are the plans for 21, for the 2021 intake for those joining in September?
Sure. Well, obviously, I don't have a crystal ball. I wish I did, and I could tell people exactly what's happening. I mean, obviously, our most important consideration is the health and safety of our staff and our students. And at all times, we follow public health guidelines. So as people are aware, we're currently online at the moment. Since last March, we did actually bring our classes in briefly for a few weeks at the start of the year, but unfortunately then we had to go back to an online environment. So obviously we don't know what's going to happen for the next cohort, but you know, we're all obviously very hopeful that with the rollout of the vaccine, that we'll be in a much better space, that our students will be able to come on campus. We know that our students value our on-campus experience, and you know, it was discussed in the last boardroom session really that, you know, that people want to kind of meet each other in person and interact. But certainly what we've done since last March is we've really built up our expertise in delivering our sessions in the current format. We have a lot of supports. You know, our lecturers are speaking to one another, sharing insights, we're gathering feedback. So I think we've really become very strong at delivering in an online environment. And I think for the future, you know, I think there is going to be some element of hybrid. It's certainly, that's my own prediction. I'm not stating any view of the college as such, but Cal, I don't know, do you want to contribute to that?
Yeah, just one point. I was teaching a finance module in the autumn trimester, and the level of community that arose despite the virtual online setting was remarkable. I mean, these students, these people were really working together, really cared about the result, and they were under a lot of pressure, you know, grade-wise and time-wise, and the sense of community that emerged despite the platform. You know, you could see the students really gelling together and really making the very most of the situation. So it's worthwhile bearing that in mind. It's not a sterile environment just because we're online. There's still a lot of relationship building, experience sharing, and collaboration going on.
Absolutely, Cal. And, you know, certainly from the social side, you know, we've run a lot of actually social events online, quizzes, cocktail making classes, networking events. And I suppose one of the big advantages of having everything in an online environment is that we do get access to speakers and to alumni that are maybe in a normal course of events wouldn't be able to physically come on campus, but in an online environment are able to do that. So, you know, certainly there's disadvantages, but there's also advantages too. So, you know, we are certainly making the best of it. But as to the question, of course, we don't know what's going to happen and we have to follow guidelines, and we'll continue to do so.
Great, thanks, Sophie. Just a question that came in as well was regarding, you know, is there a particular cutoff point career-wise when an MBA is more effective or recommended? I don't know if any of you would be able to maybe give your thoughts on that.
I might see if Jess wants to contribute to this question, Jess, in terms of maybe the experience someone brings to the MBA.
Yeah, I think really it is a personal decision, but I would advise people that, you know, it is worth doing an MBA once you do have a certain amount of work experience under your belt, because it is very collaborative. And as Cal and Sophia said, there's a lot of group work. It's, you know, you really do bring your own experiences to the class. It's not a case of, you know, listening to a professor or an academic. It's very engaged. So it's important that you have the experience to be able to bring that so that you get the most out of it. But how many years that would really be up to the individual. I would say just broad spectrum on the full-time MBA, the average is about 6 to 7 years work experience, and for the executive MBAs it's about 13 to 14. Now that's just an average. We would have people all through the range, so it's really ultimately your own decision, but I do reckon, you know, don't try and do it too early. Do give yourself a few years work experience before you apply, is what I would recommend.
Great. And Jess, just a lot of questions in around when to apply, you know, what is the application deadline, and also deadlines in relation to scholarships.
Yeah, absolutely. So we offer rolling admissions. So what that means is we don't have a hard deadline as such to apply by, but I would recommend that you do start your application as soon as possible. Don't leave it too late in the year, just because there is an interview process. So, you know, just be cognizant of that. We would also, because we do look for a GMAT or an EA score, what you can choose to do is go through the interview and application process first, get a conditional offer, and then look at sitting your GMAT or EA. And as you'll see from Cahill's video earlier today, it just took him a few weeks to prepare for it, but it did take a few weeks. So you don't want to leave it too fine. The course does start at the end of August, so I wouldn't recommend applying too late in the summer is what I would recommend to people, because also you do want to give yourself a little bit of a break and try and get a bit of a summer holiday before you start in the course. And then in terms of scholarships, so firstly, I just wanted to say that you can just get one scholarship. You can't combine scholarships. So that was one of the questions that came in. And you just apply for one. You apply for the one that you deem yourself most suitable for. If you're not successful in that scholarship, you would be considered for other scholarships as well. But it is just one scholarship per application per year. The scholarships do have deadlines. So if you look at our website, they all have different deadlines and they have different dates to apply by and different dates that you need to have your GMAT or EA score into us. They generally close around spring, I would say. So do just have a look at them and just be quite mindful of those dates. But if you're not dependent on a scholarship, you do have plenty of time to apply.
Thanks for that, Jess. And another question's come in around class sizes. Can you indicate the kind of average class sizes? And then in relation to group work, how big or small are the groups?
Sure, yeah, I can probably answer that, I suppose. I'm sure Cal can too. So I suppose typically we, in our full-time program, we would have between 30 and 40 on the full-time program. So I suppose one thing we don't often emphasize enough is our small class size relative to many MBA programs, because certainly our international students, they are delighted with this, because, you know, some of the bigger MBA programs, you can be lost within the program. But here you really do get to know the faculty, the staff, the program team. You get to meet people on the corridor. So you get to know your classmates really, really well. So I think this relatively small class size is a huge advantage for our program, and essentially you're part of a very strong community. You make friends for life essentially, and you get to know people really well. So that's one thing to kind of highlight. And for our modular executive MBA and for our midweek our executive MBA, you know, obviously our modular is a new program, so you know we're estimating that would be around 30 or so in the class, but again, all of our programs typically would be 30 to 40. And we purposely do that because we want interaction, and we want to kind of have people getting to know each other really, really well. And obviously in kind of a close, hopefully in a close classroom environment, but also in an online environment. It's not too big a class where you can still make your point as well. So yeah, so I suppose in answer to the question, in summary, between 30 and 40, but obviously Kathy, it just does vary depending on the year. So that could change slightly from what I'm guesstimating at this point.
Great, thanks for that, Sophie. And just Jess, could you just share details again in relation to prep courses for the GMAT and EA as well, some inquiries about that?
Yes, so if you want to sign up for them, they're free to attend. If you go onto our website under the events page, they're there available to book. It's just a Zoom link, so you don't need to you can pre-register, but you can also just attend live in the day. And jury covers an individual section of the quantitative part of the EA/GMAT in every session, so you can attend one or you can attend all four. It's up to yourself.
Great, perfect. Well, listen, I hope we've gotten through most of the questions, and certainly if you've additional questions, we would encourage you to contact the MBA team. Jess can provide the email address and contact details before we finish up on the Q&A. So thanks for that. I'll hand back to Sophie.
Great, thanks Kathy. Yeah, so we've just run out of time. So I just want to first of all thank everybody for joining us today. I see that we have very high participant numbers and we're delighted. And I suppose the advantage of having a virtual session like this is that even despite the awful weather here this morning and the rain in Dublin, which would normally put people off coming to campus, you're still able to participate. So thank you for your time and for your questions. And obviously, as I've mentioned before, the mba@ucd.ie is the email address for any specific questions about our programme. And we will follow up next week. We will email all the people who are registered today with the webinar and some of the slides. We'll send those out next week. And we hope that you will consider coming to Smurfit to do our MBA programme. And thank you for your time this morning.